cold mist rests in the grass above the Killarney Upland valleys tonight, and you begin here with us, high among rounded slopes where ancient ice once moved slowly through the stone. Settle in and let your breathing find the same unhurried pace as the valley air. The first thing you notice is the damp softness of Kerry, the smell of wet heather, peat and mountain grass, and the pale light lying gently on the backs of the hills. We are not hurrying through the Killarney Upland valleys. We are only arriving quietly, while the land remembers a colder world beneath every stream, hollow, ridge and lake. You can feel that memory in the shape of the ground, even before we name it. The valleys do not fall sharply like cracks in broken rock. They open with a broad, rounded patience, their sides smoothed by ice that pressed and flowed for ages. Under your feet, the earth feels soaked and springy, while the stones keep a deeper chill. Far below, water gathers in dark lakes, and above them the mountains rise with softened shoulders, as if the whole place has been sleeping under a white weight. Long before the moss, the oak woods and the quiet paths, the Killarney uplands held ice like a slow-moving sky brought down to earth. Snow collected in high basins, season after season, until its lower layers became dense and blue, heavy enough to begin moving. It did not rush, it leaned, it pressed, it followed weakness in the land, sliding through old river valleys and widening them as gently as time can widen anything. And as we move deeper into this landscape, we begin with the first cold gathering, where snow became ice in the high hollows. Up near the slopes of Mangerton and the surrounding uplands, you can imagine the air growing colder than the hills remember now. Your face feels the wet wind, and in that wind there is a hint of snow, though tonight we only picture it falling. It settles into sheltered bowls, into shaded places where summer warmth cannot quite reach. Year after year, the snow loses its lightness and becomes firm, granular, and then quietly solid. This is how an ice age begins to touch a valley, not with a single event, but with accumulation. Snow survives one season, then another, and its own weight presses the air from its crystals. Beneath the surface, separate flakes become a mass of ice, clear in places and cloudy in others, dense enough to flow though it still seems still. If you stood beside it, you might hear almost nothing, only wind combing the grass that still showed along the ridges. We can think of the early glaciers as patient sculptors, but that word is almost too active for them. They did not choose a form. They followed gravity, temperature, and the old shape of the bedrock below. In the Killarney upland valleys, that meant moving from higher ground into troughs already begun by streams, then deepening and widening those troughs over thousands of quiet years. Under the ice, stone met stone in darkness. Pebbles and boulders frozen into the glacier's base scraped the valley floor, while meltwater slipped along unseen channels below. The sound, if you could have heard it, would have been muffled, a low grinding far beneath the white surface. Above, everything would have looked almost motionless. Below, the land was being softened into the shape we now wander through. The cold did not erase the older landscape. It gathered it into a new form. Ancient rock, earlier rivers, faults, slopes, and weathered hollows all remained part of the story, but the ice gave them a broader language. It took narrow valleys and opened them. It took steep corners and rounded them. It carried fragments away, then left others behind where the flow slowed and thinned. As you rest with that thought, the high basins grow quieter around us, and the ice begins its slow descent into the valleys below. Down from the high ground, the glacier would have moved like a river too thick to ripple. You can picture it filling the valley from side to side, a pale mass pressing against rock walls, smoothing some surfaces and plucking others away. The air above it would smell clean and mineral, with little vegetation to sweeten it, while the world beyond the ice waited under a muted sky. We move with it now in imagination, not quickly, but at the pace of deep pressure. This is where the Killarney upland valleys began to take their wide, rounded form. Before the ice, many upland valleys would have been more V-shaped, cut by streams that worked downward into the land. Glaciers behave differently. Because ice fills the whole valley floor and presses against both sides, it carves broadly, turning narrow channels into U-shaped troughs with flat or gently curved bottoms and steep softened walls. You can feel that shape when you picture yourself standing in one of these valleys today. The ground does not simply drop beneath you, it opens around you, wide enough to hold silence. The slopes rise on either side, often weathered and green, with exposed rock showing through like old bone beneath moss. Water moves quietly through the bottom, and sheep tracks or deer paths may follow terraces left by older flows. The science is simple when held gently. Ice has weight, and weight creates pressure. At the base of a glacier, that pressure can help ice melt slightly, even in cold conditions, making a thin film of water that allows movement over the rock. Stones trapped in the ice become tools of abrasion, polishing, scratching, and grinding the valley floor. Where the glacier freezes onto fractured bedrock, it can pull blocks away, a process called plucking. So the valleys were shaped by both smoothing and removal. One place was rubbed clean, another was tugged open. A hollow deepened where softer or more fractured rock gave way. A ridge resisted, then emerged later as a rounded rise. Nothing happened suddenly, and yet the total change was immense, because the ice had time, and time is the deep strength of quiet landscapes. Life would have been sparse close to the ice, but not absent around its margins. In milder intervals, hardy plants took hold where they could, and meltwater fed cold streams full of fine rock flour. You might imagine the smell of raw stone in that water, a faint grey cloudiness moving beneath ice edges. The valley was not empty. It was waiting in a cold, slow kind of life. And as the troughs widened beneath the moving ice, the valley floors began to hold the future places where water would gather. Below the old ice roots, the Killarney lakes lie like dark mirrors set into the memory of glaciation. You can see the evening light folding over Loch Lean, Muckross Lake, and the Upper Lake, each one held by hollows shaped and overdeepened during colder times. The water looks still from a distance, but close to shore you hear small movements against stone, soft laps and pauses, as if the lakes are breathing in their sleep. The Killarney upland valleys did not become lake country by accident. Glaciers carved unevenly, deepening some basins more than others, especially where ice flow was concentrated or bedrock offered weakness. When the ice melted back, water filled these depressions. In other places, ridges of deposited sediment, called moraines, helped hold water in place, creating natural thresholds and quiet basins that still shape the drainage today. You can think of each lake as a filled footprint of ice. Not a footprint in mud, but in stone. The glacier moved through and pressed down, hollowing the valley floor below the level that an ordinary river might have cut. Then, when warmth returned, meltwater and rain settled into those hollows. The result is a landscape where sky, mountain, forest, and glacial memory all meet at the water's surface. When you stand near these lakes in mist, the senses become very small and clear. There is the smell of wet leaves. There is the mineral coolness rising from the shore. There is the dull shine of stones under shallow water, and the soft darkness where the lake deepens beyond sight. A bird may call once from the woods, then leave the whole valley quiet again. The ice also left behind a kind of hidden architecture. Under the water and soil, there are uneven floors, buried sediments, rock thresholds, and old channels. Some were carved by ice directly. Others were made by meltwater rushing beneath or beyond the glacier, carrying sand, gravel, and silt into new arrangements. Today, those materials influence where streams wander, where marshes form, and where trees find deeper or shallower ground. This is the gentle intimacy of glacial landscapes. They hold their history under softness. You see moss, water, reeds, and reflections, but beneath them are old pressures and long departures. The valley does not announce what happened. It lets you notice, slowly, as your eyes adjust to the shape of things, and your breathing settles beside the lake. And below the lakes, where water follows the old glacial pathways, we come to the passes and narrow places where ice once found its way through stone. In the gap of Dunlow and nearby upland passages, the land tightens again, and you feel the valley walls draw closer without becoming harsh. The air there can feel cool, even on a mild day, carrying the scent of damp rock, grass, and water moving somewhere out of sight. You walk, or simply imagine walking along a route that seems made for quiet passage. Yet its openness was shaped by ice that once filled it deeply. The Killarney Upland valleys are connected by these saddles, gaps, and glacial corridors. Ice did not always remain neatly inside one basin. It spilled across divides, merged with neighboring flows, and pressed through lower passes where the landscape allowed it. In narrow places, the movement could be focused, which made erosion more intense along the floor and sides. The result is a passage that feels both enclosed and open, intimate and ancient. You can picture the glacier moving through such a gap, not as a violent force, but as a vast white body finding the easiest line downhill. Its surface might have creaked in winter cold. Meltwater might have run beneath it in summer, hidden in blue-gray tunnels. Along the base, grit and stones worked slowly against the bedrock, leaving smoothed surfaces and small scratches that pointed in the direction of flow. Where ice encountered resistant rock, it often shaped it into rounded forms. These smooth knobs and slopes can carry the feel of a hand passed over stone again and again. On one side, abrasion made a gentle incline. On the other, plucking sometimes left a steeper face. Such forms tell us how the ice moved, but they also give the present landscape its calm physical rhythm. Rise after rise, hollow after hollow. There is a quiet lesson in these passes. A narrow place does not always mean tension. Sometimes it is simply where movement becomes focused, where water, wind, and ice learn the contours of the earth. As you imagine yourself there, the walls do not press in with urgency. They hold the path. They keep the sound close. They let every small stream seem more audible. Even now, after the ice has gone, the same roots continue to guide the valley's life. Rain runs where meltwater once ran. Roads and paths often follow the gentlest grades. Lakes and streams remain strung together along lines the glaciers clarified. The whole upland system has the feeling of an old song, with verses repeated in water, stone, and shadow. And as we leave the narrow passes, the slopes above us show the quieter marks of ice along their sides. On the flanks of the Killarney Mountains, you begin to notice shelves, benches, and softened shoulders that interrupt the climb. They may not seem dramatic at first. A slope eases, then rises again. A scatter of boulders rests in heather. A wet hollow holds rushes and shining grass. But these small details belong to the same glacial story, and the Killarney upland valleys are made richer by them. When a glacier fills a valley, its surface has a height, and its edges meet the slopes along shifting lines. As the climate changes and ice thins, those lines move downward. Meltwater can run along the ice margin, cutting channels beside the glacier or leaving sediments where flow slows. In places, debris carried at the side of the ice forms lateral moraines, long ridges or mounds that mark former glacier edges. You can imagine standing beside one of these old margins. On one side, ice once rose pale and immense. On the other, exposed hillside held frost-shattered rock, sparse plants, and wet soil newly free of snow. The wind would have moved coldly through that boundary, smelling of stone dust and thaw. It was a place between worlds, not fully ice, and not yet the green valley we know now. As ice retreated, the landscape did not instantly become settled. Meltwater braided across raw ground. Fine sediments washed into basins. Larger stones stayed where they fell, or where ice released them. Some boulders, carried far from their source, were left resting in places where they seem almost thoughtful now. Quiet erratics in grass, each one a traveler from a colder age. These boulders are among the most tender signs of glaciation, if we allow ourselves to see them that way. They are heavy, but they speak of movement. They are still, but they were carried. You can place your hand in imagination on their damp surfaces and feel lichen, chill, and rough mineral grain. The stone has been waiting long after the ice let it go. The upland slopes also carry the work of freeze and thaw. During cold periods, water entered cracks, froze, expanded, and helped loosen rock from cliffs and outcrops. Some of that debris fell onto glaciers and traveled with them. Some collected below steep faces as scree. Even this slower breaking belongs to the Ice Age world, where temperature, water, and time shape the mountain without haste. And as the slopes soften behind us, we follow the meltwater downward into the valleys where new soils began to form. When the ice withdrew from the Killarney Upland valleys, it left a landscape that must have felt newly exposed, though no one was there to describe it. Bare rock shone in wet light. Gravel bars lay across valley floors. Cold pools gathered in hollows, and streams carried fine suspended sediment that made the water look pale and cloudy. The air would have smelled of thawing stone, clean rain, and the first thin beginnings of soil. Meltwater was one of the great arrangers after the glaciers. It sorted what ice had carried without sorting. Heavy stones dropped quickly. Gravel settled where currents slowed. Sand moved farther. Silt and clay drifted into stiller basins, eventually forming soft beds beneath lakes and marshes. In this way, the hard work of ice was followed by the finer work of water, and the valleys became layered with quiet textures. You can feel this layering as you imagine walking from a rocky slope down to a wetter valley floor. Underfoot, the ground changes. Stone gives way to thin soil, then to peat-soft patches, then to the yielding edges of streams and lake margins. Each texture has its own sound. A boot on rock clicks faintly. Grass makes a dull hush. Wet ground presses back slowly, as if reluctant to let go. Plants came gradually following climate, soil, and shelter. First came hardy colonizers, then richer communities as organic matter accumulated. In the Killarney region, the mild, wet Atlantic climate later helped woodlands grow in sheltered places, with mosses, ferns, and lichens thriving in the moisture. The ice shaped the containers, and the climate filled them with green life. We see the result now as softness over structure. The ancient valleys did not lose their glacial character when vegetation returned. They simply clothed it. Trees lean along lake edges because the basin holds water. Bog and wet grassland form where drainage remains slow. Streams curve through sediments laid down by meltwater. The present ecosystem is not separate from the Ice Age past. It is the living surface of that past. There is comfort in that thought. Even after a cold age passes, it leaves conditions where gentleness can gather. A hollow becomes a lake. A raw slope becomes mossy. A scatter of stones becomes shelter for roots, insects, and small lives moving quietly under leaves. The valley does not need to forget its coldness to become peaceful. And as the green cover deepens, we sink further into the long stillness of the lakes and valley floors. Near the water, the Killarney landscape slows almost completely. Reflections of mountains drift across the lake surface, and the old glacial basin holds them without effort. You can hear small waves folding against reeds, the occasional drip from an overhanging branch, and the soft movement of air through leaves. Beneath that quiet surface, sediments continue to settle, grain by grain, just as they have since the ice withdrew. The Killarney upland valleys are still being shaped, though now the work is subtle. Rivers bring particles from the hills. Peat grows where water lingers and plant material decays slowly. Lake beds receive pollen, mineral grains, fragments of leaves, and the fine dust of weathered rock. Each layer becomes a page in the valley's long memory, written without hurry in mud and silt. If you could look into those sediments, you would find traces of changing climate and vegetation. Pollen can tell of open tundra-like conditions after glaciation, then shrubs, then woodland. Mineral layers can speak of erosion from bare slopes. Organic rich layers can speak of calmer, greener times. Science reads these records carefully, but tonight we let the idea rest softly, like a book closed beside a sleeping lake. The sensory world here is hushed and full. The air tastes faintly of rain. The lake smells dark and clean, with a little earthiness from reeds and wet leaves. Stone steps near the shore hold cold from the evening. The light fades from silver to blue-gray, and the far slopes lose detail until they become one continuous, breathing shadow. In this quiet, it becomes easier to understand ice as part of a larger rhythm. The cold came, stayed, moved, shaped, and withdrew. Water followed. Soil gathered. Forest returned. The valleys accepted each change without resistance, because landscapes do not hurry to explain themselves. They simply keep becoming what time and weather allow. You are allowed to rest in that same way. Nothing in these valleys asks you to be sharp or alert. The old ice has already done its work. The lakes are already holding the sky. The slopes are already darkening into evening. We only stay with them, breathing slowly, while the land settles around us. And as night lowers over the uplands, we drift toward the deeper memory held in the bedrock beneath the glacial forms. Beneath the green slopes and the lake-dark hollows, the bedrock of Killarney waits with a patience older than ice. You can imagine it under your feet now, hidden by moss, soil, and roots, holding the long shape that the glaciers later revealed. The ice did not begin with a blank surface. It moved across old sandstone, folded beds, fractured places, and valley lines already offered by the land. In the quiet beneath everything, stone gave the first guidance. Much of the upland country around Killarney is built from ancient red sandstones and related rocks, laid down long before the last ice came and went. These rocks had already been lifted, tilted, weathered, and cut by rivers over immense spans of time. When you picture the glaciers arriving, picture them following a landscape with memory already inside it. The ice widened what water had begun. It deepened where weakness allowed. It pressed harder along routes that gravity had prepared. So the Killarney upland valleys are not only glacial valleys, they are conversations between old stone and later ice. You can feel that conversation in the way a valley bends, in the way a lake narrows, and in the way a rocky shoulder resists the softness around it. The glacier was strong, but it was not free to move anywhere it liked. It listened to the bedrock, in the only way ice listens, by flowing along the easier path. This is why the land feels so composed. Nothing here belongs to a single moment. The lake basin, the pass, the polished rock, the boggy hollow, and the wooded slope all come from different stages of the same slow making. As we let our attention rest on that, the valley becomes less like a view and more like a layered presence. You're not looking at scenery, you're floating through time, and below this older foundation, we follow the hidden lines that guided the ice through the uplands. The valleys around Killarney often follow structural weaknesses in the rock, places where ancient folding, faulting, or bedding gave water and ice a quieter way through. You can imagine these lines as soft instructions written into stone before any glacier arrived. A stream may have found them first, cutting a narrow path through the uplands. Later, ice came down the same route, heavier and broader, and turned that earlier line into a valley wide enough to hold mist. When you stand within such a valley, you may not see the structure directly. What you notice is the curve of the ground, the way slopes face each other, and the way water keeps returning to the lowest seam. The air may smell of wet grass and fern, with cold stone close by in the shaded places. Your eye follows the valley floor almost naturally, as if the land is still teaching movement. That ease is part of the glacial inheritance. Ice thickens the importance of old roots. Because it has great weight, it erodes more where it is concentrated, and less where it thins or spreads. A pre-existing valley can become a channel for glacier flow, and that focused flow can deepen the floor below the neighboring ground. Over time, the valley becomes overdeepened, shaped not simply by surface water, but by the full body of ice moving through it. The result can be felt in the Killarney lakes and upland basins, where water now rests in places carved too deeply for ordinary streams alone. The lake surface seems calm, but beneath it, the basin may hold a rock floor lowered by glacial abrasion and plucking. You don't need to see that floor to feel its depth. The darkness of the water tells you enough. It holds the sky, and it holds the old cold below. There is something restful in knowing that even the strongest forces follow the shape they inherit. Ice ages feel vast in the mind, and they were vast, but their work still depended on subtle guidance. The glacier did not conquer the uplands. It entered them, leaned into them, and followed them downward. In that thought, the valley becomes less dramatic and more intimate. It was shaped through contact. And as we follow the contact between ice and stone, we come to the smoothed surfaces that still remember movement. On exposed rock near the Killarney upland valleys, you may find surfaces worn low and rounded. their roughness softened by an old passage of ice. Rain darkens them now. Lichen gathers in pale green patches. Your hand, resting there in imagination, would feel dampness first, then fine grain, then the cool firmness of stone that has held its place through repeated weather. These rocks have not forgotten the glacier. They keep the memory in their skin. Glacial abrasion is one of the quietest kinds of carving to imagine. Stones frozen into the base of a glacier scrape against the bedrock as the ice moves. Sand and silt grind between the ice and the ground like a slow polishing cloth. Though the pressure is immense, over years beyond counting, rough surfaces become smoother, and faint grooves may be left behind. These scratches, called striations, can show the direction the ice once flowed. We can picture the glacier passing over a rock knob, smoothing the side it climbed and plucking blocks from the side it left. This creates a rounded, asymmetrical form, gentle in one direction and steeper in the other. In a landscape like Killarney, such forms may be softened further by rain, vegetation, and time, but the basic shape remains. You start to notice them once you know to look. The hills begin to speak more quietly. The sensation of these surfaces is important. They are not sharp monuments. They are places where the cold weight of ice became a curve under moss and water. A small stream may run over one after rain, its sound light and silver against the dark rock. Ferns may lean from cracks. The same surface that once lay under glacier pressure now receives mist, fallen leaves, and the soft tread of animals. This is how the Ice Age remains without dominating the present. Its marks are held gently, blended into the living landscape. You may pass them at dusk without naming them, but your body still recognizes their smoothness. The valley floor feels open because of them. The slope feels shaped because of them. The lakes seem cradled because of them. They are quiet evidence. And as the smoothed stones settle behind us, we move toward the broken blocks and carried boulders that the ice left in its retreat. Across the uplands and valley margins of Killarney, scattered stones sometimes rest as if placed by careful hands. Some are small enough to sit among heather, others are large enough to feel like low, patient presences in a field or beside a path. You can imagine touching one at evening, its surface cool and rough, with rainwater gathered in shallow hollows. It seems completely still now, though ice once carried it away from its first home. These glacial erratics and boulder spreads are part of the story of transport. A glacier does not only carve, it gathers. Rock falls onto its surface from cliffs, freezes into its sides, or becomes lodged in its base. As the ice moves, it carries this material along, sometimes for a short distance, sometimes much farther. When the climate warms and the glacier melts, the cargo is lowered onto the land and left there without ceremony. In the Killarney upland valleys, such deposits help us imagine the body of ice as a moving mixture of frozen water, stones, grit, and hidden sediment. It was not a clean pane sliding over the earth. It was textured inside and below, full of fragments from the mountains it crossed. You can hear, in imagination, a muffled grinding under the ice, and the small runnels of meltwater carrying finer material away. Everything moved at a deep, measured pace. A boulder left behind by ice has a strangely gentle quality. It tells of movement without still moving. It tells of distance without needing a road. Moss grows over it, lichens color it, and grasses soften its edges. Children might climb it, rain might darken it, and sheep might shelter near it in weather. But beneath those later uses it remains a quiet message from the cold. There is no need to make the message loud. The boulder says only that the land has been rearranged slowly. Stone that began on a ridge may now rest by a stream. Material torn from a cliff may now lie in a valley bottom, part of soil, wall, shore, or hidden bed. The glacier carried pieces of the uplands into new relationships, and the present landscape accepted them. As you picture these stones in dim light, the valley becomes a place of arrivals. Not human arrivals, but geological ones. Sand arrives from a slope, gravel arrives from meltwater, a boulder arrives from ice, a leaf arrives from a tree rooted in post-glacial soil. Each rests for a while, and the valley holds them all, and as those carried stones grow still in the grass, we sink toward the softer deposits that gathered where the ice melted away. The retreat of ice from the Killarney upland valleys would have left behind a landscape full of wet sediment, shifting water, and exposed rock. The cold body of the glacier thinned first along its edges, then pulled back from lower ground, leaving meltwater to run through channels and across newly uncovered floors. You can picture the sound as a constant low murmur, water moving under grey skies, carrying sand, silt, and fine rock flour into hollows. Till, the mixed sediment laid down directly by ice, often contains many sizes together. Clay, sand, gravel, cobbles, and boulders may rest side by side, unsorted because the glacier released them as it melted. Meltwater, by contrast, sorts as it flows. It drops heavy pieces first and carries finer grains farther away. In this difference, we can read the changing energy of the valley after the ice. The ground became a record of release. Imagine standing on a valley floor soon after the glacier withdrew. Your boots would sink into raw, damp ground. Little streams would braid and divide around stones. Pools would cloud with suspended minerals, and the air would hold the cold smell of fresh sediment. There might be very little green at first, only the first signs of colonizing plants in sheltered places. The valley would feel newly opened, but not empty. Over time, the exposed sediment settled into patterns that still matter. Well-drained gravels became different habitats from heavy wet tills. Fine silts collected in low places and lake margins. Organic matter slowly joined the mineral base, darkening the soil and allowing richer plant life. Every softness we see now rests on those earlier arrangements. Even a fern beside a path depends on a long chain of glacial and post-glacial events. The lakes received enormous amounts of fine material in the centuries after deglaciation. Streams carried suspended particles into quiet water, where they settled layer by layer. Some layers came from strong meltwater pulses. Others came from ordinary rain and erosion after vegetation returned. Beneath the lake surface, that layering continues like a slow breath, with each season adding something almost weightless to the dark floor below. You can feel the comfort of such slow settling. Nothing asks the sediment to become stone quickly. It lies down when the water calms. It receives pollen, mineral dust, tiny remains of lake life, and fragments washed from the slopes. The valley floor becomes softer through accumulation, and the glacial hollow becomes a place where stillness can keep things. And as fine sediments drift into the lakes, the edges of water begin to thicken with peat, moss, and living quiet. The wet margins of the Killarney landscape are among the gentlest places to imagine at night. Reeds stand with their feet in dark water. Moss swells over stones. The air smells of rain, leaf mold, and the faint earthy sweetness of peat. You can hear droplets falling from branches long after the shower has passed, each one returning to a valley shaped by ice and softened by growth. The whole place seems to breathe through moisture. Peat forms where waterlogging slows decay, allowing plant material to build up over time. In hollows, poorly drained flats, and lake margins influenced by glacial topography, organic layers can accumulate slowly. The ice created basins and altered drainage. Later climate, rainfall, and vegetation filled those damp spaces with mosses, sedges, reeds, and other plants. The result is a living cover over glacial ground, soft enough to take an imprint and slow enough to preserve memory. You can picture a small boggy hollow above one of the Killarney lakes. It may have begun as a shallow depression left by uneven glacial erosion or deposition. Water lingered there because it had nowhere easy to go. Plants grew, died, and partly decayed in the saturated ground. Layer after layer gathered, not as a dramatic event, but as a long, quiet thickening. The hollow became less like open water and more like a wet cushion of time. This is where the landscape becomes especially suited to sleep. The peat does not hurry, the moss does not insist. Even the water seems to move by suggestion rather than force. If you imagine lying nearby, Wrapped in the cool smell of rain and grass, the valley's history becomes a kind of lullaby. Cold made the hollow, water held it, plants softened it, time lowered its voice. The ecosystems here are tied to the shapes left by glaciation. A wet floor supports different life than a dry slope. A sheltered valley holds different humidity than an exposed ridge. Lakes moderate the air nearby, while surrounding hills catch cloud and rain. The Killarney upland valleys are therefore not just scenery shaped by ice, but quiet habitats guided by ice long after it disappeared. In such places, small lives make use of ancient forms. Insects hover near still water. Mosses take hold on damp stone. Ferns unfurl in shaded clefts. Trees lean into sheltered hollows where soil has deepened. None of this is separate from the glacier. It is the soft continuation of the glacier's work, carried forward in green. And as the peat grows and the margins darken, we follow the streams that move from the uplands toward the lakes. Streams in the Killarney upland valleys often feel intimate, even when they are part of a much larger glacial story. You may hear one before you see it, a silver sound under trees or beside stone. It slips over rock steps, gathers in pools, and threads through grasses where the valley floor is wet. The water is cool to imagine on your fingers, with the clean smell of mountain rain and shaded earth rising around it. Before the ice ages, streams carved downward by flowing along the lowest available lines. During glaciation, those same valleys were reshaped and overdeepened by ice. After the ice melted, streams returned to a changed world. Their courses were redirected by moraines, blocked by sediments, or guided into basins that became lakes. In some places, the modern stream is too small for the large valley it occupies, a gentle sign that ice once did greater work there. These are sometimes called misfit streams, though the phrase sounds less tender than the reality. The stream is not wrong. It is simply living inside a valley shaped by something larger. You can imagine it winding across a broad floor, modest and clear, while steep valley sides rise beyond it. Its voice is small compared with the scale around it, and that smallness makes the space feel even quieter. Waterfalls and rock steps may also carry glacial meaning. Where ice deepened a main valley more than a side valley, a tributary can be left hanging above the main floor. Water then descends by falls or steep cascades, not with anger, but with the soft persistence of gravity. In Killarney, where hills, lakes and wooded slopes come close together, these descending waters add a clear thread of sound to the older silence. As you follow a stream downward in your mind, you can feel how it touches every part of the story. It runs over bedrock shaped by ice. It cuts through sediment left by ice. It feeds lakes held in glacial hollows. It wets moss that grows in post-glacial dampness. It carries tiny grains from the hills toward the low basins, continuing the work of rearrangement in a gentler voice. There is a kind of companionship in a stream like this. We descend with it, and it descends with the valley. It does not need to know where the glacier went. It only follows the path available now, under ferns, around stones, through dusk, and into still water. Its movement makes the stillness easier to hear, and as the streams settle into the lakes, the valley walls above us begin to show the work of frost and gravity after the ice. The slopes around the Killarney upland valleys are not only carved from below by glacier ice, they have also been loosened from above by cold water and gravity. You can imagine a cliff or steep rocky face after the ice has thinned away, newly exposed to wind and frost. Water enters cracks by day, freezes by night, and expands with a quiet force. Little by little, pieces of rock become ready to fall. This process, often called frost weathering, helped shape many cold landscapes during and after glacial times. It works without drama. A crack widens slightly, a flake loosens, a block shifts. Eventually, stone drops to the slope below, where it may collect as scree or be carried by ice, water, or slow soil movement. The sound of such a fall would be brief, but the preparation could take many seasons of cold. Today, those slopes may be softened by vegetation, but the underlying pattern remains. Angular stones can gather below rocky outcrops. Thin soils cling to steep ground. Heather, grasses, and mosses find places among the fragments. The air there may feel sharper than in the valley floor, with wind moving freely and the smell of wet stone more open. You can look down from such a slope and see the glacial valley below, wide and calm. There is a beautiful contrast between the valley's rounded trough and the broken material along its sides. The glacier smoothed the broad form. Frost and gravity supplied sharper details. Rain then softened both. Over time, the land became a balance of curves and fragments, polished rock and shattered stone. Deep hollow and rough edge, nothing is out of place. Each texture belongs to a different pace of shaping. We can hold that balance gently. Not every part of a peaceful landscape has to be smooth. Some stones are angular, some slopes are uneven, some stream beds are rough under clear water. Yet the whole valley remains calm because these forms have settled into relationship. The broken rock is not interruption. It is part of the resting body of the uplands. As night gathers, the rough stones lose their edges first. Shadows fill the cracks. Moss glows dimly where it holds moisture. A breeze moves across the slope and down into the valley, carrying the smell of rain and plant life. The ice age feels far away, and still, every contour keeps its trace. And as the last light leaves the slopes, we turn toward the wooded hollows that grew in the shelter of glacial ground. The woodlands around Killarney have a hushed, rain-fed richness that rests beautifully inside the older glacial shape. In sheltered valleys, trees can gather where soil, moisture, and protection from harsher winds allow them to hold on. You can imagine walking beneath oak branches near evening, the leaves dark above you, the ground soft with moss, and the air full of that deep woodland smell of bark, wet leaves, and slow decay. It feels held. The ice did not plant the woods, but it prepared many of the places where they later rooted. By carving basins, widening valleys, and leaving varied sediments, the glaciers created differences in drainage, soil depth, and exposure. Some slopes remained thin and rocky. Some hollows became wet and peaty. Some valley edges collected enough material for deeper soils. These variations made room for a mosaic of habitats, each shaped by its position in the glacial landform. In the Killarney upland valleys, this means the living landscape is textured by the older physical one. Ferns favor damp shade, mosses cover stones and fallen wood. Trees lean into slopes where roots can hold. Streams keep certain corridors humid, and lakes reflect moisture back into the air. When mist gathers under the canopy, it seems less like weather passing through, and more like the valley exhaling. You can feel the glacial story even in the sound of the woods. A stream falling from a hanging side valley gives one note. Wind moving over a broad trough gives another. Water against a lake shore adds a slow pulse at the edge of hearing. Birds, when they call inside a space made larger by ice. The valley gives resonance to the living world. There is comfort in how life returns to shaped ground. The glacier left raw surfaces, wet hollows, and scattered stones, but none of these remained bare forever. Roots entered cracks, moss-covered boulders, leaves fell and became soil. The cold form became a green shelter. You can rest with that transformation, because it asks nothing sudden from the imagination. It is change by settling, and as the woodland darkens into deeper green, we move toward the open ridges where ice thinned and the sky feels nearer. Above the valley floors, the ridges and higher slopes of Killarney feel more exposed, with wind moving over heather and rock. You can imagine standing there as twilight lowers, the air cool against your face, the smell of damp grass rising from the ground. Below, lakes lie dark in their basins. Around them, valleys shaped by ice spread quietly outward. From here, the pattern becomes easier to sense. The land opens like a slow map. During glaciation, higher ridges may have stood above or near the surface of moving ice at different times, depending on ice thickness and local conditions. Some summits were overridden, smoothed, and weathered under ice. Others experienced intense freeze-thaw weathering near ice margins or in exposed cold air. This difference can create contrasts between rounded lower forms and rougher upper slopes, giving the uplands their layered texture. You do not need to separate every process perfectly to feel the whole. The ridge is windy, the valley is sheltered, the lake is still, the pass is narrow. Each place holds a different memory of ice, water, and weather. As you look from above in imagination, the Killarney upland valleys appear not as isolated hollows, but as a connected system shaped by flowing ice and later filled by water and life. The high ground also tells us about direction. Ice moves from accumulation zones toward lower areas, but in complex uplands it can divide, merge, or be redirected by relief. Snowfields feed glaciers. Glaciers follow valleys. Ice may cross low divides when thick enough. Later, when climate warms, the pattern reverses slowly as ice thins back toward the high places. The land records both movement outward and retreat inward. There is a soft melancholy in imagining the ice thinning from these ridges, but not a sorrowful one. It is the feeling of something finishing its long work. The white surface lowers, dark rock appears, meltwater shines in channels. The air carries more rain than snow. Small plants find the first sheltered patches. The valley begins, almost imperceptibly, to become the world we recognize. From the ridge, you might watch mist collect below, as if the old ice had returned in a lighter form. It fills troughs without weight. It softens slopes without carving them. It lies over lakes without freezing them. For a moment, the valley remembers whiteness, but only as breath, and then the breath thins into night, and as we descend from the ridges again, we come to the place where glacial cold meets the warmth of the present climate. Killarney today is shaped not only by its ice age past, but by the mild, wet influence of the Atlantic. You can feel that climate in the skin of the landscape. Stones are damp, moss is thick, leaves shine after rain. The air tastes clean and slightly mineral, with a green softness that seems to settle on everything. The ice carved the bowls and troughs, but present weather keeps them lush, reflective and alive with water. After the glaciers retreated, the climate did not become the same everywhere at once. Warming occurred unevenly, with colder reversals and gradual transitions. The land responded through vegetation change, soil development, and shifting water systems. In the Killarney upland valleys, the later Atlantic wetness helped turn glacial forms into the wooded, lake-filled, moss-rich landscape that feels so distinctive now. The valley's calm is partly carved and partly grown. Rain is one of the softest continuations of ice. It falls where snow once gathered. It runs down slopes once pressed by glaciers. It fills hollows once deepened by frozen movement. Its sound is small, but over long spans it changes everything, carrying minerals, feeding bogs, polishing stones, and keeping streams alive. If ice was the slow sculptor, rain is the quiet caretaker, returning again and again to the same shapes. You can imagine rain beginning over the Killarney uplands tonight. It touches heather first, then rock, then the surfaces of leaves. It dims the lake with tiny rings. It runs into thin channels and joins older streams. There is no urgency in it. The sound is steady enough to sleep beside, a soft pattern laid over a much older pattern. The whole valley becomes a single listening place. This present moisture also helps soften our sense of the Ice Age. The word glacier can feel hard and white, but here its aftermath is green, shadowed, and full of gentle sound. The cold made room for water. Water made room for moss and trees. Moss and trees made room for the damp hush that fills the valley now. You can let that sequence move through your thoughts slowly. The Killarney upland valleys are therefore not frozen relics. They are living landscapes shaped by cold and maintained by rain. Their ancient forms remain beneath every wet root and shining stone, but the present lays softness over them. That is part of their peace. Nothing has been erased. Everything has been layered, and as rain continues over the old glacial forms, we follow one quiet drop from the slope towards the lake. A drop of rain on an upland slope begins almost invisibly. It gathers on a blade of grass, trembles in the cool air, then slips downward into moss or soil. You can follow it without hurry. It may sink into peat for a while, or run over stones shaped by ice, or join a tiny thread of water descending towards the valley floor. Its journey is small, but it follows a route made by immense forces. In the Killarney upland valleys, every movement of water is guided by the glacial shape of the land. The slope decides direction. The hollow holds pause. The stream gathers flow. The lake receives what arrives. Even where the water seems free, it is responding to contours carved, deepened, blocked, and rearranged during colder ages. A single drop can carry the whole story in miniature, from high rock to dark basin. As the drop joins others, it becomes a trickle, then a streamlet, then part of a larger stream crossing the valley floor. It may pass through grasses rooted in glacial till, over gravel sorted by meltwater, and beside boulders left behind by retreating ice. It may carry a speck of mineral matter loosened from the slope, or a tiny fragment of leaf from the present woodland. Old and new travel together in that clear movement. The sensory world narrows beautifully when we follow water this closely. We hear the faint thread of sound under moss. We smell wet earth. We see the glint of pale light on a moving surface. We feel, in imagination, the coldness of it against the fingertips. The valley becomes intimate, not because it is small, but because we have chosen one quiet path through it. Eventually, the water reaches a lake or a slower reach of stream, and its movement eases. Suspended grains may settle. Organic fragments may drift to the margins. The drop becomes indistinguishable from the larger body that receives it. This is not an ending, only a soft joining, the way many small processes join to make a landscape feel whole. You can rest with that joining. Breath joins air, rain joins stream, stream joins lake, ice age joins present evening. Each movement loses its sharp edge as it becomes part of something larger and calmer. The valley teaches this without words, through the shape of water and the patience of stone. And as the drop disappears into the lake, the deep basin opens beneath the surface again. Under the dark water of Killarney's lakes, the glacial hollow continues downward beyond sight. The surface may reflect trees, clouds, or a pale opening in the sky, but below it, the basin holds a colder, quieter world. You can imagine the water growing dim with depth, green fading into grey, then into soft black. The lake does not feel empty. It feels held by the carved floor beneath it. Lake basins shaped by ice often have uneven bottoms, with deeper scoured areas and shallower thresholds. In Killarney, the relationship between mountain slopes, glacial troughs, and lake hollows gives the water its varied form. Some shores are rocky and close, others soften into reeds, wet woods, or low ground. Beneath the visible edge, the basin continues the geometry of ice, a hidden valley filled with still water. Sediment settles here in quiet layers. Fine particles from streams drift outward and sink when currents slow. Organic matter from plants and lake life joins them. Over long spans, these deposits create a soft archive at the bottom, preserving hints of climate, vegetation, and erosion. The lake floor is not dramatic, it is patient. It receives what the valley gives and keeps it in darkness. You can imagine lowering your attention through the water, not as a dive, but as a thought descending. Sound becomes muted, light becomes thin. The cold steadies. Above, rain may touch the surface in 1,000 small rings, but below, the movement is slow and faint. The glacial basin remains around you, carved before the lake existed, now filled with the hush of settled water. Life in the lake moves at its own scale. Small organisms drift. Fish pass through shadow. Plants root in shallower margins where light can still reach. The deeper parts remain quieter, connected to the valley by inflowing streams and settling particles. The lake is an ecosystem, but also a memory chamber, holding living rhythms within an ancient carved bowl. There is a sleepfulness in the way lakes cover their origins. They do not hide them entirely, they soften them. A hollow made by cold becomes a mirror for sky. A scoured basin becomes a place where reeds whisper. A valley deepened by ice becomes dark water resting under evening. The old work becomes calm. And as the lake holds the last light, we turn towards the moraines and thresholds that shaped where the water could stay. Moraines are among the quiet boundaries of glacial country. They may appear as low ridges, hummocky ground, or uneven spreads of sediment, sometimes softened by grass, trees, or peat. You might walk over one without knowing its name, feeling only that the ground rises gently under your feet before falling again. Yet such ridges can tell where ice paused, thinned, or left material behind. In the Killarney Upland valleys, these deposits helped organize water. A moraine forms when a glacier carries debris and releases it along its edge or at its snout. If the ice front remains in one position for a time, more sediment can accumulate there. Later, when the glacier melts back, the ridge remains as a marker of that pause. It may block drainage, redirect streams, or help form a lake by creating a natural dam across a hollow. Its power is quiet, but enduring. Imagine the edge of the glacier standing at a valley threshold. Meltwater runs from beneath it, cold and cloudy. Stones slump from the ice. Sand and gravel spread outward in small fans. The ice front slowly lowers and retreats, but for a while, it leaves a mound of mixed earth and rock. When the ice is gone, that mound becomes part of the valley's shape, a low memory of where cold once lingered. Today, such features can be disguised by vegetation and weathering. Grass rounds them, roots hold them, rain cuts small channels through them. Trees may stand on their slopes, unaware of the ice margin they occupy. You can feel the softness of that concealment. The moraine does not rise like a monument. It rests like folded fabric under the living surface. These thresholds matter because water is obedient to small differences in height. A ridge of sediment can turn a stream aside, deepen a pond, or slow drainage enough for wetland to form. Over time, plants respond to that water. Soil responds to plants. Animals respond to habitat. In this way, a ridge left by melting ice becomes a quiet architect of the ecosystem long after the glacier has vanished. The valleys around Killarney are full of such layered causes. A gentle rise may be glacial. A wet hollow may exist because drainage was blocked. A lake shore may sit where ice once left a threshold. As we notice these things, the landscape grows more restful, not less, because everything has a reason that unfolds slowly. And as the moraines settle into darkness, we follow the valley through one of its long post-glacial evenings. Evening in the Killarney Upland valleys brings a softness that seems to belong to the land's glacial shape. The broad floors gather shadow first, then the slopes darken upward. Lakes turn from silver to pewter to black. The air cools near the water, and the scent of wet stone becomes clearer. You can stand in this fading light with us, and feel the valley's width around your breathing, steady and low. The U-shaped form of a glacial valley changes how evening feels. Wide floors hold pools of dimness. Steep sides catch light briefly, then release it. Water reflects what remains of the sky, making the darkness appear layered rather than flat. Even sound behaves differently, traveling along the valley, softening against slopes and woodland. The shape made by ice becomes a shape for twilight to enter. There is science inside that sensation. Topography influences microclimate, drainage, vegetation, and light. A broad glacial trough can hold cooler air near its floor at night. Lakes moderate temperature and add humidity. Slopes create differences in sun exposure, shelter, and soil moisture. These small variations shape where moss stays wet, where woodland thrives, and where open grass or heath remains. The valley is not uniform. It is quietly arranged. You may notice the small lives first in this hour. A moth moves near a wet stone. A bird settles into the trees. Insects hover over still water where the air is calm. None of these lives needs the glacier directly, yet all live within its architecture. The ice widened the room. The water furnished it. The climate softened it. Life entered and made use of every surface it could. For a listener resting in bed, this is the kind of landscape that can become a breathing pattern. Light lowers, air cools, water darkens. A broad valley receives night without strain. You do not need to follow every detail sharply. You can let the forms pass through you, one at a time, like shadows along a lake shore. And as night fills the valley floor, we move further back into the colder rhythm of the ice ages themselves. The ice ages were not a single simple freeze. but a series of cold and warmer intervals across a long span of Earth's recent geological history. In Killarney, as in much of Ireland, the landscape was influenced by repeated glaciations, though the most recent major ice left many of the clearest marks we recognize today. You can imagine the uplands passing through cycles of snow, ice, retreat, rain, vegetation, and then colder return. These cycles were guided by changes in Earth's orbit, atmospheric conditions, ocean circulation, and the slow feedbacks of ice and climate. We do not need to hold all of that at once. For tonight, it is enough to picture the valleys breathing over immense time. Cold gathers, ice forms, valleys widen, warmth returns, water fills the hollows, green life comes back, then the world changes again, with a patience almost beyond thought. The Killarney upland valleys hold evidence of these rhythms in their forms and deposits. Some features may be refreshed by later ice, while older traces become modified, buried, or removed. Glacial landscapes are palimpsests, though the word is a little bright for such a quiet place. They are surfaces written over more than once. The final writing is what we see most clearly, but earlier lines may remain underneath. You can imagine the land between glaciations, not as finished, but as resting. Streams return to valley floors. Plants cover sediment. Soil forms. Lakes receive layers of organic matter. Then, if cold strengthens again, snow begins to persist on high ground, and the whole slow process of ice growth may resume. The valley does not resist this. It becomes part of the rhythm. There is peace in thinking on such long cycles because they make ordinary time feel lighter. A day's trouble becomes small beside a valley that has held ice, water, forest, and mist. You do not disappear in that smallness. You are relieved by it. The land is not asking for urgency. It is showing you scale, and scale can be a soft place to rest. As we drift through that scale, the ice thickens again in imagination, and the valley grows pale under a colder sky. Picture the Killarney uplands during a glacial maximum, when ice spread through valleys and across parts of the landscape in a continuous, cold body. The familiar greens are gone from the high ground. Lakes as we know them are hidden, absent, or covered. The air is dry and sharp, carrying little scent beyond snow, stone, and cold mineral dust. Yet even this scene can be held gently because it is slow, quiet, and deeply still. The glacier surface might not be flat. It would rise, dip, crack, and curve around buried terrain, with snow drifting across it and wind smoothing its upper skin. Beneath that surface, the ice moved. It flowed under its own weight, deforming internally and sliding at its base where conditions allowed. The movement could be only a little each day, but over years and centuries, that little became enough to remake valleys. You are not standing in danger here. You are watching from the calm distance of imagination, guided by what the land later revealed. The ice presses down into the Killarney upland valleys. It fills the old stream courses. It crosses lower divides, where thick enough. It carries stones from slope to valley, and from valley to basin. It turns existing relief into the broader, quieter shapes we see after retreat. At the bed, pressure and friction create a hidden world. Meltwater may run in channels under the glacier, sometimes under great pressure. Sediment may be dragged, smeared, or lodged beneath the ice. Bedrock may be polished in one place and fractured in another. The surface above remains pale and quiet, while the base does the slow work. This contrast is central to glaciation, a calm exterior over deep movement. When we picture that cold scene, we can still find softness. Snow absorbs sound. Light becomes diffuse. The horizon blurs. The valley is not loud. It is covered, muted, and held beneath weight. The drama belongs only to the scale, not to the moment. One breath would feel cold, then another, and the glacier would continue moving too slowly to startle the eye. And as that imagined ice begins to thin, the first dark openings appear again at the valley margins. The retreat of ice is often spoken of as if the glacier simply moved backward, but the truth is gentler and more complex. The ice margin may retreat, because melting exceeds accumulation, even while ice inside the glacier continues to flow forward. In the Killarney Upland valleys, as climate warmed, the balance changed. More ice melted each season than snow could replace, and the glacier's visible edge withdrew through a landscape filling with water. You can imagine the first exposed slopes appearing along the margins. Dark rock emerges from white, meltwater runs in thin shining lines, sediment slumps where the ice releases its load. The air smells wetter now, less like frozen dust and more like thawing stone. There may be fog where cold ice meets milder air, softening every outline. The valley returns slowly, piece by piece, into sight. Retreat is a deeply creative phase in a glacial landscape. As ice thins, it leaves debris in ridges, mounds, and spreads. Meltwater carves channels through exposed ground. Blocks of buried ice can melt later and leave kettle-like hollows in some landscapes. Lakes may form temporarily against ice margins, then drain or change level as thresholds open. The valley after ice is not instantly stable. It adjusts softly through water. In Killarney, the post-glacial landscape became organized around basins, thresholds, slopes, and drainage routes left or emphasized by the ice. Some hollows filled with lakes. Some wet areas began the long development of peat. Streams reoccupied valley floors, sometimes cutting into soft deposits and sometimes wandering across them. The old frozen weight dissolved into moving water, and the water began to arrange what remained. You can feel the emotional temperature of this change. It is not triumphant, it is tender. A valley hidden under ice becomes visible again. Stone receives rain. Soil begins to darken. The first plants enter small protected places. The land does not return to what it was before, because the ice has changed it. It becomes something new, but slowly enough that the change feels like waking. And as the waking valley gathers water, we listen to the lakes forming in their deepened beds. A lake begins where water can stay. In the Killarney Upland valleys, water stayed because ice had deepened hollows and altered thresholds, leaving basins ready to receive rain, meltwater, and streams. You can imagine a newly exposed depression filling season by season. Its edges raw at first, its water cold and cloudy. The surface reflects a bare slope, then sparse plants, then eventually woodland and sky. The lake becomes the valley's memory. At first, the water may carry much fine sediment from the newly deglaciated slopes. Streams enter full of silt, making pale plumes that spread into the basin. As vegetation grows and stabilizes the ground, the water may clear, and organic matter becomes a larger part of the lake's accumulating floor. This transition from mineral-rich youth to calmer maturity is common in post-glacial lakes, though each basin follows its own local path. You can see that calm maturity now when you picture the Killarney lakes under low cloud. The shores are softened by trees, rocks, reeds, and moss. The water looks dark because it holds depth and reflection together. Beneath it, the basin shape remains glacial, but the surface mood is restful. A faint ripple moves outward from a falling drop, and then the lake returns to itself. Lakes also connect the valley's processes. They receive water from streams, sediments from slopes, nutrients from surrounding soils, and organic matter from living communities. They influence local humidity and temperature, helping shape the feel of nearby woodland and wetland. In this way, a glacial hollow becomes more than a depression. It becomes a center of ecological quiet, drawing many parts of the landscape into relation. For sleep, lakes are gentle teachers because they show how depth can be peaceful. The basin is deep because ice worked there. The water is dark because light cannot reach everything. The surface is calm because wind has eased. None of this is empty or frightening. It is simply layered, cool, and accepting. You can let your thoughts settle like fine silt through water, and as the lake fills its hollow, the shorelines begin to soften with plants returning after the cold. The first plants after ice would have been modest, able to live in open, cold, unstable ground. Over time, as climate warmed and soils developed, plant communities changed. In the Killarney region, Later conditions allowed richer vegetation, including damp woodland and moss-heavy habitats that now give the landscape so much of its intimate softness. You can imagine that slow greening is a breath drawn over centuries, not a single arrival. Bare sediment does not stay bare when conditions allow life. Tiny plants and microorganisms begin the work of holding particles together. Roots enter fine cracks. Dead plant material adds organic matter. Soil becomes deeper, darker, and better able to retain moisture. On glacial deposits, this process can vary greatly over short distances because the sediments themselves vary from coarse gravel to dense till to fine lake-edge silt. This variation matters to everything that grows. A dry, stony rise supports one community. A wet hollow supports another. A shaded stream bank supports ferns and mosses. A lake margin supports reeds and sedges. When you look across a Killarney valley, the pattern of vegetation is partly a response to drainage and soil, and those conditions were strongly influenced by glaciation. Ice shaped the stage, and plants learned every part of it. You can feel this in the textures underfoot. One step might be firm on gravelly ground, another might sink into damp grass. Near the lake, the soil may feel dark and yielding. On a slope, roots may twist around stone just below the moss. These changes are not random. They are the present-day surface of an older glacial arrangement, made soft enough for the body to notice. The return of vegetation also changed erosion. Roots held slopes more gently. Plant cover slowed runoff. Organic matter improved soil structure. Streams carried less raw sediment once the ground was clothed. Lakes became clearer in many places, and valley floors developed the quieter, more stable surfaces we can imagine tonight. Life did not end geological change. It softened its pace. There is reassurance in that. A landscape can be altered deeply and still grow tender. Ice can carve a valley, and moss can cover the stone. A hollow can be gouged by cold and later hold lily pads, reeds, or reflected branches. Time does not only wear things down, it also gives them coverings, fragrances, and places to rest, and as plants settle into the old glacial ground, the valley becomes a home for quieter ecosystems. The ecosystems of the Killarney Upland valleys are shaped by water, shelter, elevation, soil, and the lasting architecture of ice. You can imagine each habitat as a room within the larger valley, some bright and open, some damp and shadowed, some held beside dark lake water. The air changes as you move. It cools near streams. It smells richer under trees. It grows sharper on exposed slopes. The whole valley breathes in layers. In the sheltered woods, moisture supports mosses, lichens, liverworts, and ferns that thrive in the mild, wet atmosphere. On open upland ground, heather and grasses take the wind. In boggy hollows, waterlogged soils slow decay and allow peat-forming plants to build their quiet thickness. Along lake edges, reeds and aquatic plants create small worlds for insects, fish, and birds. These habitats are not separate from the glacial story. They occupy its forms. You start to notice how ancient shapes make room for ordinary lives. A boulder left by ice becomes a damp surface for lichen. A hollow created by uneven erosion becomes a wet pocket for moss. A stream redirected by sediment becomes a corridor of humidity through woodland. A broad valley floor becomes a sheltered place where cool air and mist can gather. The Ice Age lingers as opportunity. There is no need to make these lives dramatic. They do not perform for us. They go about their small, necessary rhythms. A fern unfurls. A beetle moves beneath wet leaves. A fish holds in the darker water near a shore. A bird settles into a tree at dusk. Each life rests inside conditions shaped by cold, water, and time. The valley supports them without announcement. For you, drifting with this narration, the ecosystem can feel like a deep quilt of relationships. Stone supports moss. Moss holds moisture. Moisture cools the air. Cool air feeds mist. Mist softens light. Light fades over the lake. The chain is simple, slow, and soothing. It lets the mind move from one gentle connection to another without needing to wake fully. And as those quiet habitats fold together, we return to the broad valley form that holds them all. The U-shaped valley is one of the clearest signatures of glacial shaping, and in Killarney it becomes more than a diagram. It becomes a lived space of air, water, shadow, and sound. You can imagine standing on the valley floor with slopes rising on either side, not knife-edged, but broad and heavy with rain-dark vegetation. The sky above is a long opening. The ground beneath is cool. The whole form feels cradled. A river-cut valley tends to be narrower at the bottom because running water cuts mainly downward. A glacier, filling a valley with its whole thickness, erodes across the floor and sides at once. This widens the valley and creates the classic trough shape. It may also leave truncated spurs, where ridges that once projected into a river valley are cut back by ice, making the sides appear more straightened and open. When you look along such a valley, the view can seem especially calm because the ice has removed some of the earlier irregularities. The eye travels more easily. The slopes seem to belong to a single, slow curve. Water gathers in the floor. Mist follows the length of the trough. Sound moves softly through it, less broken than it might be in a narrow gorge. The form itself encourages the body to exhale. The Killarney upland valleys carry this feeling in their relationship between mountain, lake, and pass. The ice did not create the mountains from nothing, but it clarified the spaces between them. It deepened the lows and softened the transitions. It left valleys large enough for still water, woodland, and weather to settle into. The result is a landscape that feels spacious without feeling empty. You can let your imagination move along the valley floor now, slowly, almost as if carried by cool air. On one side, rock and heather rise into shadow. On the other, trees darken near a stream. Ahead, the valley opens toward water. Behind, the path disappears into mist. Nothing pulls you forward sharply. The shape itself is enough, and as the broad trough carries us onward, we listen for the quieter evidence left high along the valley sides. Along some valley sides, traces of former ice levels may be hinted at by benches, changes in slope, meltwater channels, or lines of deposited material. These features can be subtle, especially in a wet, vegetated landscape like Killarney, where moss, grass, and woodland soften the ground. You may only sense a shelf underfoot, or notice that the slope pauses before rising again. But even a small pause can hold a memory. Ice-marginal meltwater channels can form where water flows along the edge of a glacier, trapped between ice and hillside. As the ice surface lowers, new channels may form at lower elevations. These can leave a stepped record of thinning ice, though later erosion and vegetation may blur them. In upland valleys, such features help us imagine the glacier not as a fixed mass, but as a changing body with edges that moved over time. Picture walking along one of these softened lines near dusk. The ground is damp. Grass bends under the weight of recent rain. A shallow channel curves along the hillside, no longer carrying the meltwater that made it. Instead, it may hold rushes, moss, or a thin trickle after storms. The original force has gone, but the form remains as a quiet indentation in the slope. These upper traces remind us that deglaciation was gradual. Ice thinned downward from its surface and back from its margins, leaving evidence at different heights. Water responded to each temporary arrangement. Sediment collected where flow slowed. Channels opened and were abandoned. The valley was changing through a sequence of pauses, not a single disappearance. Its present calm was assembled through many small stages. There is a gentle companionship in noticing faint features. They reward unhurried attention. A hurried eye sees only hillside. A quiet eye sees an old watercourse, a line of stones, a bench where slope and history meet. You do not need to identify everything correctly to feel the depth of it. The valley asks only that we look softly. And as those faint hillside lines fade into darkness, the deeper trough leads us toward the pass where one valley gives itself to another. A glacial pass can feel like a held breath between two basins. Around Killarney, the upland valleys and gaps connect mountain spaces in ways that were shaped and clarified by ice movement. You can imagine approaching such a pass slowly, with wet rock on either side, a narrow road or path underfoot, and water lying in small dark pools along the way. The air is cooler there. enclosed and resonant with hush. When ice thickens enough, it can cross cols and low divides, linking valleys that may have begun as separate drainage systems. This movement can lower or widen passes, abrade rock surfaces, and leave deposits that later influence drainage. After the ice melts, the pass remains as a route for wind, water, animals, and human paths. Though tonight we keep our attention on the natural form, the stone corridor itself. The Gap of Dunlow is one such place people often associate with the Killarney landscape, but we approach it in our minds as geology first. The valley narrows, the sides rise, and small lakes or tarns occupy hollows along the way. These waters rest in rock basins and low places influenced by glacial erosion. Their surfaces are small compared with the larger lakes below, but their stillness is just as complete. You can hear how sound changes in a pass. A stream seems closer. A bird call, if it comes, touches the rock and returns softened. Wind moves through the gap with a low, steady tone, not loud, but present. The smell is mineral, grassy, and wet. Every sense is gently gathered because the land narrows around you without closing. It is a passage, not a barrier. Glacial shaping often gives passes a feeling of inevitability. The route seems obvious, as if the land itself has opened a way. But that openness may be the result of long erosion, first by water and then by ice, followed by countless years of rain and weathering. What feels simple now is the surface of deep complexity. The pass is a quiet sentence written by many forces. And as we pass through this narrowed place, the valley opens again toward water and lower ground. Emerging from a glacial pass into a broader valley can feel like entering a slower room. The walls ease away. The sound spreads. Water gathers more visibly, and the sky widens overhead. In the Killarney Upland valleys, this alternation between narrow gap and open basin gives the landscape its gentle rhythm. You move from enclosure into spaciousness, from stone corridor into lake country, always held by the same ancient pattern. The glacier would have experienced these changes in reverse and sequence as it moved through the land. Where the valley narrowed, ice flow could be compressed and focused. Where the valley opened, ice could spread and lose some of its erosive concentration. This variation helped create differences in basin depth, sediment distribution, and valley form. The land's present rhythm reflects the changing behavior of ice in different spaces. You can imagine the ice emerging from a pass into a wider hollow, its surface broadening, its internal flow adjusting, its debris load shifting. Beneath it, abrasion continued, but perhaps differently than in the constricted corridor. Meltwater found new paths. Sediment gathered in places where the energy of flow changed. Later, when the ice was gone, water and vegetation inherited this pattern and made it gentle. Today, a broader basin may hold a lake, wet meadow, woodland, or a mixture of all three. The air may be less sharply mineral than in the pass, and more filled with damp leaves and open water. Your body senses the difference immediately. The shoulders drop. The breath lengthens. The land has widened, and the mind widens with it. This is one of the reasons glacial valleys can feel so calming. Their forms are large, readable, and slow, even when the geology is complex. The body understands open floor, rising side, dark water, and fading light. We do not need to solve the landscape. We can move through its rhythm, letting each change arrive gradually. And as the wider basin settles around us, the last of the evening light draws our attention to the mountain silhouettes above. The mountains around Killarney rise from the glacial valleys with a softened strength, their upper slopes darkening as night comes on. You can picture their outlines against a pale western sky, not sharp in every detail, but layered in blue-gray distance. The valleys below hold lakes and trees, while the higher ground holds wind, wet rock, and the memory of snowfields. Together they form a single quiet body. During cold periods, upland snowfields and small glaciers likely occupied high hollows and contributed ice to larger valley systems. Where snow accumulated in sheltered basins, cirque-like hollows could be enlarged by nevation, frost action, and glacial erosion. These bowl-shaped features, where present, speak of ice forming near mountain heads before flowing downward. They are the starting rooms of glaciers, high, shaded, and patient. Imagine such a hollow near the head of a valley. Snow gathers there because the shape protects it. Wind deposits more. Summer melt does not remove everything. The lower snow compacts and becomes ice. Rock walls around the hollow are loosened by freeze-thaw, and debris falls onto the forming glacier. Slowly, the basin deepens and steepens, becoming a cradle for cold. Later, meltwater may leave a small lake or wet floor behind. The sensory feeling of these high hollows is different from the lake valleys below. The air is thinner and more exposed. The smell is mainly wet stone, grass, and cloud. Sound is spare. Perhaps only wind over a ridge or water beginning in a hidden spring. Yet the feeling is not severe. It is quiet in a higher key, close to the sky, where the valley's story begins in snow. From such places, ice once flowed downward toward the basins we've been imagining. The high hollow, the trough valley, the pass, the lake, and the wet woodland are all connected. The glacier was the temporary body that linked them through motion. After it melted, water continued the connection. Tonight, our attention follows that same downward thread, and as the mountain hollows fade into cloud, we descend again into the lower darkness where the valley keeps its deepest calm. Back on the valley floor, night has settled more fully. The lakes are nearly black now, with only faint reflections along their surfaces. Trees become dark masses against darker slopes. The ground feels cool and damp, and the smell of peat rises gently from wet places. In this hour, the Killarney upland valleys seem less like a landscape to look at and more like a place to be held by. The glacial form matters even in darkness. You cannot see every slope, but you can sense the openness around you. The valley floor gives the night a broad place to rest. The lake holds a deeper shadow. The surrounding hills shelter the air from moving too quickly. This is topography becoming atmosphere, geology becoming mood. Ice carved the space, and now darkness fills it softly. It is useful to remember that stillness is not the absence of change. Sediment is still settling in the lakes. Streams are still moving grains downstream. Roots are still entering cracks. Rain is still dissolving minerals from stone. Peat is still building where water remains. The valley is active in ways that do not disturb sleep. Its work is steady, quiet, and almost below hearing. You may notice that this kind of activity feels different from surface busyness. Nothing flashes for attention. Nothing demands response. The changes happen at the pace of water entering soil, moss growing over rock, and silt descending through dark lake water. The Killarney valleys invite the mind to loosen its grip because the land itself is not gripping anything tightly. There is no need to imagine the ice has gone completely. It remains in form, not substance. It remains in the widened valley, the overdeepened basin, the rounded rock, the scattered boulder, the wet hollow, and the path of every stream. The cold age has become shape, and shape has become calm. And as that calm deepens, we let our attention sink beneath the soil to the hidden archive held below the valley floor. Under the grasses, moss, peat, and lake mud, the Killarney upland valleys hold records that can be read by those who study landscapes closely. Layers of sediment, changes in grain size, buried organic matter, and pollen preserved in wet places can all tell parts of the post-glacial story. Tonight, we do not read them like data. We imagine them as soft pages lying in the dark. A core taken from lake sediment may reveal changes from mineral-rich deposits near the end of glaciation to more organic layers as plants returned. Pollen grains can show shifts in vegetation through time. Charcoal mineral particles and organic remains can indicate changes in erosion, climate, or local conditions. Each layer is thin, but together they form a long, quiet sequence of valley life after ice. You can picture these layers accumulating without any witness. A spring flood brings silt. A summer bloom settles as fine organic matter. Autumn leaves break down along the shore. Winter rains move small grains from the slopes. Year after year, the lake floor receives them. The process is almost silent, and that silence is part of its beauty. The valley remembers by letting things fall. Peat holds memory differently. In waterlogged ground, plant material decays slowly, preserving traces of older surfaces within its thickness. A boggy hollow may contain centuries or millennia of accumulated growth, each layer formed from mosses, sedges, and other wetland plants. The glacier made the hollow or helped shape its drainage. The peat then filled it with slow organic time. There is a tender contrast between the great weight of ice and the lightness of the records that follow it. A glacier can carve rock, yet pollen can preserve the story of what came after. A lake basin can be gouged by frozen movement, yet its later history may be written in grains too small to see without care. The valley's strength and delicacy are never separate. As you breathe, you can let those hidden layers become an image of rest. Thoughts settle, sounds settle. The day settles. Nothing needs to be sorted quickly. Like silt in still water, everything can drift downward and find its level in the dark. And as those hidden records lie quietly below us, the surface world continues its slow night sounds. A small stream keeps moving through the Killarney Valley, though the light is nearly gone. You can hear it as a low, continuous thread, not loud enough to wake the hills. It moves over stones that may have been shaped, carried, or exposed by glacial processes, then polished further by rain. The water's sound is a present-tense version of an ancient movement, soft and clear. Nearby, leaves may stir under a barely felt breeze. Drops fall from branches into moss. Somewhere along the lake margin, reeds touch and separate with a faint whisper. These sounds are small, but the glacial valley gives them room. Because the basin is broad, each sound seems to travel a little, then dissolve. The landscape does not echo harshly. It absorbs and returns sound gently. Science can explain parts of this atmosphere, though it does not reduce the wonder. Valley shape affects wind, water flow, and vegetation distribution. Lakes influence humidity and temperature. Rock and soil guide drainage. The legacy of ice is therefore present in the acoustic and sensory world, not only in maps and landforms. What you hear at night is partly the result of what ice did to the earth. You are still descending, though now the descent is inward rather than downward across height. We have moved from snowfields to glaciers, from carved troughs to lakes, from slopes to sediments, and now into the softness of night. The Killarney upland valleys remain around you, steady and dark. Their history does not need to be held all at once. It can surround you like low mist. The mind may wander here, and that is all right. If you drift away from the details, the valley stays. If you return, there is still water, stone, peat, and the long memory of ice. Nothing has moved quickly in your absence, nothing has been lost. And as the night sounds become softer, we follow the old ice path one more time from the high ground toward the basin below. High above the lakes, where the slopes gather cloud and the ground smells of wet heather, the old ice path begins as a feeling of weight. You can imagine snow resting there through seasons that no longer have names, whitening the hollows and pressing into itself. The Killarney upland valleys wait below, still hidden by green in our present thought, but already shaped to receive the cold. Gravity leans quietly through the land, and the first movement begins in silence. At first, there is only the slow thickening of snow. Each snowfall covers the last, and the lower layers lose their delicate shapes. Air is pressed out, crystals change. Granular snow becomes fern, and fern becomes ice, dense enough to move under its own weight. You can feel the chill of that transformation without strain, a coldness held deep in the hollow, while wind brushes the exposed ridge and carries a faint dry scent of stone. The high basins are important because they are places where accumulation can linger. Shade helps. Slope shape helps. Wind may deposit snow in one hollow and strip it from another. The glacier begins where more snow survives than melts, and the balance tips slowly toward ice. In the Killarney uplands, such sheltered beginnings would have fed the downward flow that later shaped the valleys, lakes and passes we now picture in darkness. There is no hurry in this birth of ice. A valley is not remade in one winter, or even in one lifetime. It takes cold returning again and again, until the snow becomes a body. It takes weight finding a path. It takes the patience of a landscape willing to be covered. You can let that patience settle over you as the high hollow fills and the world grows pale, and from that pale high place, the glacier begins to lean toward the valley floor. The ice moves because it must, though to the eye it may seem almost still. Under its own weight, it deforms internally, layer over layer, and where meltwater or pressure allows, it slides along the bed. You can imagine standing far away and seeing only a frozen surface, gently curved beneath cloud. But inside it and beneath it, the glacier is flowing toward the Killarney Upland valleys, with a movement too slow to disturb the sleeping hills. This slow movement is one of the softest mysteries of glaciation. Ice looks rigid in the hand, yet in great thickness it behaves over time like a very slow fluid. Its upper parts may crack because they are brittle, while deeper ice bends and flows. The whole mass responds to slope, pressure, temperature, and the hidden roughness below. It does not rush downhill. It yields to gravity in a deep and patient way. As the glacier enters a pre-existing valley, its flow becomes guided and gathered. The valley walls hold it, the floor supports it, and the old stream course beneath becomes a route for far greater weight. The ice presses against both sides, widening the space as it moves. Stones caught in its base grind the bedrock, while fractured areas may be plucked away. Every part of contact becomes part of the shaping. You can picture the Killarney landscape under that ice, as muted and blue-white. The familiar lakes are not yet shining in the open air. The woods are not yet breathing moss. The valley is covered by a cold body that is not cruel, only heavy and old in its feeling. Beneath it, the land is being taught a wider form. Above it, snow falls and softens every sound, and as the ice follows the valley downward, the old river shape begins to broaden into a glacial trough. Before the glacier, water would have worked mainly downward, cutting a narrower channel through the uplands. Under ice, the whole valley is touched, the floor is pressed, the sides are abraded, and the projecting spurs that once directed stream bends may be worn back. You can imagine the valley changing from a sharp thread into a wider vessel, a place that will one day hold lakes, wet woodland, and the calm breath of evening. The Killarney upland valleys carry this widened shape in their atmosphere as much as in their geology. A broad valley floor gives mist a place to gather. Steep, softened sides hold shadows gently. Water spreads and rests where the glacier deepened the basin. When you imagine standing there tonight, you may feel surrounded, but not enclosed. The land rises around you like a quiet room whose walls were made by cold. Abrasion smooths the surfaces where the glacier's base moves across rock with grit held inside it. Plucking removes blocks where meltwater enters fractures, freezes, or where the ice pulls fractured rock away as it moves onward. These two processes, smoothing and tearing, work together over long time. Their names may sound active, but the feeling in the landscape is not violent. It is simply the record of pressure applied beyond human scale. Where bedrock was more resistant, the glacier-shaped rounded rises and polished backs of stone. Where the rock was weaker, jointed, or more easily broken, hollows could deepen. This uneven response helped create basins within valleys, places where water later gathered. The valley we see as peaceful now was made through differences in resistance, each rock responding in its own way to the same patient ice. You can rest with that idea of response. The land did not all change equally. Some places yielded, some places held, some were smoothed, and some were hollowed. The present beauty comes from those differences, not from perfect uniformity. In sleep, too, the mind can soften unevenly, one thought releasing before another, until the whole inner landscape feels wider. And as the trough deepens, the future lakes begin as shadows beneath the ice. Under the glacier, certain parts of the valley floor are carved lower than others. These overdeepened hollows may form where ice is thicker, where flow is focused, or where the bedrock gives way more readily. You can imagine such a hollow forming slowly under the Killarney ice, invisible beneath the frozen surface. Above, snow and wind continue. Below, a basin is being made that will one day hold dark water and reflected mountains. The Killarney upland valleys are intimately linked with lake basins. and that relationship is one of their most restful features. A lake is water that has found a held place. When ice deepens a trough below the outlet level, or when sediment ridges later help block drainage, water can remain after melting. What was once pressure becomes stillness. What was once ice motion becomes a calm surface trembling under rain. In the hidden basin, abrasion continues to polish, and plucking may loosen blocks from the floor. Meltwater under pressure can move through channels, carrying fine sediment. The base of the glacier is not a simple boundary. It is a working layer of ice, water, sediment, and rock, all pressed together in darkness. The sound would be muffled beyond imagining, like distant grinding under a heavy blanket of snow. When warmth returns, this basin will be revealed slowly. At first, meltwater may fill it with cloudy, mineral-rich water. Later, as slopes stabilize, the lake may become darker and clearer, receiving reflections from trees and sky. Sediment will begin to settle. Reeds may gather at the margin. A carved hollow will become an ecosystem. The valley's depth will turn from geological fact into felt atmosphere. You can picture that future lake waiting inside the ice-shaped floor. It has no surface yet, no ripple, no reflection, and still it is already prepared. The glacier cannot see what it is making. It only moves. But the land keeps the result, and much later, a quiet listener can imagine resting beside the water that filled the hollow. And as these hidden basins lengthen through the valley, the sides of the trough are being changed as well. Along the valley walls, the glacier rubs, presses, and trims the older shape. Former river spurs that once reached into the valley may be cut back, leaving straighter sides and open views along the trough. You can imagine ice moving past these rocky shoulders, smoothing some surfaces and breaking others, until the valley becomes more direct. The future line of sight opens beneath the cold, long before anyone stands there to notice its calm. This straightening helps create the spacious feeling we associate with many glacial valleys. A river may wind around obstacles, carving bends and narrow turns, but a glacier can override and erode through projecting features. The result is often a valley that feels broad, aligned, and quietly ordered. In Killarney, where mountain slopes descend toward lakes and passes, this shaping contributes to the sense that the landscape has been drawn in long, unhurried strokes. The valley walls also receive debris from above. Freeze-thaw action loosens rock along exposed ridges and cliffs, and falling material may land on the glacier's surface or become incorporated into its margins. The ice then carries this debris onward, sometimes along its sides, sometimes down into the basal layer. A stone that falls from a high crag may later rest far below in grass or sediment, its journey hidden inside ice. You can imagine the textures along that margin. Cold air, snow-crusted rock, a dark wall rising beside pale ice, small fragments falling now and then lying motionless on the glacier until they are carried away. Nothing needs to be loud. The slope contributes to the glacier's load, one piece at a time, and the glacier carries each piece as part of its slow body. Later, when the ice melts, these carried materials help build ridges, hummocks, and uneven valley floors. The side of the valley remembers the ice edge through lateral deposits. The floor remembers retreat through till and outwash. The whole glacial system leaves not only carved stone, but rearranged fragments. In time, moss and grass will cover them, and the valley will look as if it has always been soft. And as the valley walls release their stones, the glacier carries them toward the lower ground. Transport is one of the most quietly astonishing things ice can do. A glacier gathers material from rockfalls, from its bed, and from the sides of the valley, then moves it without needing wheels, roads, or visible effort. You can picture stones held inside the ice like memories suspended in pale glass. Some are angular and fresh, some are ground smaller, some become part of the scraping base that shapes the Killarney upland valleys below. The glacier's load is not evenly distributed. Debris may concentrate along margins, at the base, or in bands where ice streams merge. Some stones ride high on the surface after falling from slopes. Others are dragged underneath, where they become tools of erosion. Fine material may be produced by grinding and carried away by meltwater. The glacier is both carrier and mill, moving rock while making more sediment from it. When you imagine this movement, keep its slowness close. A boulder does not feel itself traveling. It rests in ice season after season while the valley changes around it. The surface snow buries it. Summer melt may reveal it briefly, then it sinks or moves again as the glacier flows. Its eventual resting place may be far from its source, but the journey happens in such deep quiet that stillness and movement seem almost the same. In the Killarney landscape today, a carried boulder can feel like a punctuation mark in grass. It interrupts the softness, yet belongs completely. Lichen may cover one side. Rainwater may darken another. Small plants may root in pockets of grit on its surface. If you place your imagined hand there, you touch not only stone, but motion held in stillness. It is a traveler that has gone to sleep. These transported stones also remind us that glaciation connects parts of a landscape that might otherwise seem separate. Material from a slope becomes part of a valley floor. Sand from ground rock becomes lake sediment. Gravel from meltwater becomes a terrace or shore. The uplands are carried into the low places, and the low places hold them. The valley is made of relationships, and as the glacier carries stone, meltwater begins to move through hidden channels beneath and around the ice. Meltwater is the glacier's quieter companion, flowing where pressure, temperature, and slope allow. Beneath thick ice, it may move through tunnels, channels, and films at the bed, sometimes under pressure, sometimes carrying a heavy load of fine sediment. You can imagine its sound as dim and enclosed, water running in darkness under a ceiling of blue ice. Above, the Killarney ice looks still. Below, water finds its way. This meltwater can erode, transport, and deposit material in ways distinct from the glacier itself. It may cut channels into bedrock or sediment. It may carry sand and gravel into fans beyond the ice margin. It may leave sorted deposits where flow slows. Because meltwater responds quickly to changes in ice thickness and climate, it can create features that mark different stages of retreat. The valley becomes a record of water escaping cold. At the margins of the glacier, meltwater may flow between ice and hillside, making channels that later sit strangely along slopes rather than on modern drainage lines. These abandoned channels tell of a time when ice itself formed one wall of the stream. After the ice melted, the water was gone from that height, leaving only a curved hollow, perhaps filled with grass, rushes, or rainwater after storms. You can imagine walking beside such a remnant at dusk. The ground dips gently, and the grass grows darker where water sometimes lies. It does not look dramatic. It looks like a small softness in the hillside, yet it once carried cold meltwater along the living edge of a glacier. The present hush rests over a vanished flow, and the vanished flow rests inside the present shape. Meltwater also helps prepare the valley for later ecosystems by sorting sediments. Coarse gravels drain quickly and may support different plants than fine silts or dense till. Wet hollows collect organic matter. Sandy or gravelly patches warm and dry more readily. The patterns left by water become patterns of soil, and patterns of soil become patterns of life. The glacier melts, but its water keeps arranging the future, and as meltwater leaves the ice, the glacier's front begins to pause and retreat across the valley floor. At the snout of the glacier, the frozen body ends in an edge that is always changing. Ice flows toward it from behind, while melting removes ice at the front. If the two are balanced for a time, the margin may appear to pause. During such pauses, sediment can build into end moraines, low ridges of mixed debris. In the Killarney upland valleys, such pauses helped shape drainage, ground texture, and the places where water later gathered. You can imagine the ice front in a grey, cold season. Meltwater pours from beneath it in cloudy streams. Stones fall from the melting edge. Fine sediment spreads outward in fans and braids. The air smells raw, wet, and mineral, and the sound is a steady murmur rather than a roar. The glacier is not ending all at once. It is thinning, releasing, and withdrawing through stages. A moraine is a pause made visible. It tells us that the ice margin remained near one position long enough to leave a concentration of material. Later vegetation may smooth it, and rain may soften its outline, but the ridge can still influence how water moves. A small rise may hold back a pond. A mound may divide drainage. A line of uneven ground may mark where cold once stood still for a while. The retreating glacier also leaves till across parts of the valley floor, a dense mixed material that can hold water differently from sorted sands and gravels. Where till is compact and fine, drainage may be slow, encouraging wet ground and peat formation. Where meltwater deposits are coarser, water may pass through more easily. The valley's later patchwork of habitats begins in these physical differences. You can feel that patchwork through the soles of your feet in imagination. Firm gravel, soft peat, slick stone, moss over damp earth. Each texture is part of the retreat. Each step crosses a slightly different memory of ice and water. The present landscape feels varied because the glacier did not leave a single smooth blanket behind. It left a mixture, and as the ice front withdraws farther, open water begins to collect against the newly exposed land. Proglacial lakes can form where meltwater is trapped by ice, moraines, or valley thresholds, and though not every temporary lake remains, such waters can influence sediment and landform patterns. In the Killarney Upland valleys, the broader idea is simple and soothing. As ice leaves hollows, water gathers. Some water stays, some drains away, some leaves fine layers of silt in quiet basins, preparing the valley floor for later softness. Imagine a cold lake touching the edge of retreating ice. Its surface is pale under cloud, and small fragments of ice may drift near the margin. Streams enter with milky water full of rock flour. Where the current slows, fine particles sink through the cold water and settle on the floor. Layer by layer, the basin receives the ground-up memory of mountains. The process is gentle, steady, and hushed. Such lake sediments can later become flat or gently sloping surfaces if water levels change or basins fill. They may underlie wetlands, fields, or wooded low ground. In larger surviving lakes, similar settling continues underwater. The valley after deglaciation is therefore not only carved by absence, but filled by deposition. Ice removes, water replaces, sediment rests where motion fades. You can imagine the color of that early water, gray-green and cold, reflecting a bare landscape with only the first signs of plant return. Over time, as vegetation stabilizes the slopes, less mineral sediment enters the lake, and the water's character changes. Organic material increases, shorelines become richer, reeds take hold. The cold basin becomes a living lake, with softness accumulating at its edges. This transformation is central to the calm beauty of Killarney. The lakes do not feel like scars. They feel like held spaces. Their depth and position come from glacial work, but their present mood comes from water, light, weather, and life. Ice opened the hollow. Rain and time filled it with reflection. The valley's history became visible by becoming quiet. And as the waters steady, the first post-glacial soils begin to gather over raw stone and sediment. Soil is one of the most patient forms of healing in a landscape. After ice retreats, bare rock and mineral sediment are exposed to rain, air, frost, plants, and microbes. Tiny particles loosen. Organic matter begins to mix with mineral grains. Roots enter. Water moves through and changes the chemistry of the ground. In the Killarney Upland valleys, the soil we imagine under moss and grass began from this slow gathering. At first, the surface may have been raw and unstable. Without deep plant cover, rain could wash fine material downslope. Frost could lift and disturb the ground. Streams could braid across loose sediment. But as plants spread, even small ones, their roots helped hold particles in place. Dead leaves and stems darkened the upper layer. Microbial life increased. A living skin formed over the glacial deposits. The type of soil depended on local conditions. Coarse glaciofluvial gravels drained differently from compact till. Fine lake sediments held water differently from stony slopes. Bedrock chemistry mattered too, influencing nutrients and drainage. The Killarney landscape, with its mixture of upland rock, wet basins, and Atlantic rainfall, developed a varied surface that could support woodland, heath, bog, and lakeside communities within a small area. You can feel this variety if you imagine kneeling beside a mossy stone. The moss is wet and cool. Beneath it, dark organic matter holds the smell of leaves and rain. A little deeper, grit and mineral grains speak of rock. Deeper still, perhaps, lies sediment released by ice. Your fingers would move through layers of time without needing to name each one. The ground would simply feel alive. Soils make the glacial landscape habitable. They soften slopes, feed roots, hold moisture, and filter water moving towards streams and lakes. They are not separate from geology, but geology made tender. When you breathe in the scent of damp earth in a Killarney valley, you are breathing the present expression of ancient stone, old ice, and long rain. And as the soil deepens, the valley's green life begins to arrange itself around water and shelter. Vegetation in a glacial valley follows the quiet rules of moisture, light, soil, and exposure. Near lakes and streams, the air is damp and cool. In sheltered hollows, wind is reduced. On slopes, drainage and sun exposure vary. In the Killarney Upland valleys, these differences allow a gentle mosaic of habitats, from wet woodland and mossy rock to open heath, boggy ground, and lake margins. The valley becomes varied without losing its calm. You can imagine the woodland returning in slow stages after the cold. Shrubs first, perhaps then trees, as conditions allow, with each generation adding shade and organic matter. Mosses spread over damp stones. Ferns find shaded crevices. Lichens color boulders left by ice. On wetter ground, peat-forming plants begin their slow accumulation. In each place, life responds to the glacially shaped surface beneath it. A broad valley floor may hold wetness because drainage is slow or because the water table lies close to the surface. A rocky slope may shed water quickly, supporting thinner soils and more open vegetation. A lake margin may shift with water levels, allowing reeds, sedges, and wet-loving plants. These patterns are the visible softness of hydrology, and the hydrology was deeply influenced by ice. There is a restful intimacy in these plant communities. They are not merely covering the valley, they are reading it. Roots follow cracks, moss follows moisture, trees gather where shelter allows. Heath spreads where soil is thin and wind moves freely. Every leaf, stem, and spore is part of the land's response to shape. The ice carved the spaces, and living things filled them carefully. When mist rises through such a valley, it unites the habitats for a while. The lake, the bog, the woodland, and the slope all share the same grey softness. Edges blur, distance quiets. You feel the Killarney landscape as one breathing system, with its glacial bones covered in green and its waters resting in ancient hollows. And as mist gathers above the living surface, the deeper geological time beneath the ice comes back into view. Long before the ice ages, the rocks of the Killarney uplands formed in environments far removed from this present wet valley. Sand, silt, and other sediments, accumulated in ancient settings, hardened into rock, then were uplifted, folded, fractured, and weathered through time. The glaciers came much later, entering a landscape already old. You can imagine the bedrock beneath the valley as a memory older than the cold itself. This older geological foundation mattered because glaciers do not carve all rocks equally. Bedding, joints, fractures, and differences in hardness influence erosion. Where rock is fractured, ice and meltwater can exploit weakness. Where rock is more resistant, forms may remain higher, smoother, or less deeply cut. The Killarney upland valleys were therefore shaped by an interaction between inherited geology and glacial force, not by ice alone. In a calm way, this makes the landscape feel even deeper. The valley is not a single story, but an overlapping one. Ancient sediments became stone. Stone became mountain and valley. Ice entered the valleys and widened them. Water filled the hollows. Plants softened the surfaces. Rain continues the work. Your attention can drift through these layers, and each one carries you farther from the urgency of the present. You can picture a rock outcrop near a lake, wet from evening rain. Its surface may show bedding or fractures, though moss covers part of it. The glacier may have smoothed its exposed face, while weather has opened cracks since. Lichen glows faintly in the dim light. In one small outcrop, many times meet. The old stone, the ice age, the present rain, and the living moss all share the same place. This is why quiet landscapes reward slow looking. At first you see a rock, then you see its rounded shape, then you sense ice, then you remember the rock was already ancient before the ice touched it. The mind descends without needing to move, and the valley becomes almost oceanic in its depth of time, dark and layered beneath the surface. And as that older time settles beneath us, we return to the familiar sound of water crossing stone. A stream running through the Killarney upland valleys does not know the names of the processes that shaped its course. It simply moves where gravity and ground allow. You can hear it in the dark, crossing a shallow rock lip, then sliding into a pool. Its water is cold from rain and upland seepage. It carries tiny grains, leaf fragments, and the faint mineral trace of the slopes above. Its voice is steady. Modern streams continue the work of shaping, though on a smaller scale than the glaciers. They cut into sediments, polish stones, move gravel during high flows, and deliver material to lakes. In places, they occupy oversized valleys, their present flow modest compared with the trough they inhabit. This contrast is one of the most quietly revealing signs of glacial history. The stream is small because the valley was enlarged by ice. You can imagine such a stream wandering across a broad valley floor. It does not fill the space, it threads through it. The slopes on either side are far apart, and the lake waits downstream. The stream's modest sound makes the surrounding form seem even larger, and the larger form makes the stream seem more tender. Both belong. The small present flow and the great old icework are held together in the same valley. At times of rain, the stream rises and becomes more energetic, but still within the valley's calm pattern. It carries silt from paths, banks and slopes. It rearranges pebbles. It feeds wetlands and lake margins. When the rain passes, it lowers again, leaving wet stones shining in the dimness. This rise and fall is a living rhythm laid over the older rhythm of glacial advance and retreat. For you, listening and settling, the stream can become a guide through the landscape. It begins high, gathers itself, crosses sediments, enters a lake, and continues beyond sight. We follow it softly because it follows the valley without question. It is the present tense of descent, and as the stream disappears into darker water, the lake surface opens under the night sky. The lake at night is a dark basin of stillness held in a glacial hollow. The surrounding slopes are barely visible now, and the water reflects only the faintest light. You can imagine standing near the shore, where stones are slick and cold, and the smell of wet leaves gathers under the trees. The Killarney upland valleys are present all around, though much of them has dissolved into shadow. Beneath the surface, the lake's shape continues downward. Its basin may include overdeepened areas, rock thresholds, and sediment-filled lows that came from the glacier's uneven work. The water column itself changes with depth, temperature, and season, but tonight we hold it simply as cool darkness resting inside carved stone. Fine particles settle slowly toward the bottom. The lake receives the valley without needing to speak. On the shore, small sounds remain. A ripple touches a stone. A branch lets fall one drop. Reeds move together, then apart. These sounds are delicate because the larger landscape is so quiet. The glacial basin holds sound the way it holds water, allowing each small movement to appear and fade. Nothing breaks the mood. Even science here feels like listening. The lake's existence depends on thresholds as much as hollows. If an outlet were lower, water might drain away. If sediment had not gathered where it did, a shoreline might sit differently. If the glacier had carved less deeply, the basin might be marsh rather than lake. A calm surface is therefore the result of many balances. all settled into a form that now seems effortless. You can let your thoughts rest on that effortless appearance. So much had to happen for this water to be here, and yet the lake does not display effort. It only lies in the dark, reflecting what little light remains. The valley has become a bowl of night, and the bowl has become still. And as the lake holds the night, the old ice margin appears again in the mind, pale and distant. Imagine standing at the edge of the retreating glacier while the Killarney Valley is still raw and cold. The ice front rises in muted blue-white, streaked with sediment and softened by fog. Meltwater runs from beneath it, spreading into channels over gravel and silt. The air smells of cold rock, wet sand and thaw. You are only observing gently, from the quiet distance of thought, while the glacier releases the land one breath at a time. At an ice margin, many processes meet. Ice melts, debris falls, water flows. Sediment is sorted, dropped and reworked. Blocks of material once held within the glacier become part of the ground. If the margin pauses, ridges form. If it retreats steadily, deposits spread more diffusely. The valley records these behaviors in uneven floors, low mounds, channels and thresholds that later vegetation may soften beyond easy recognition. This is why glacial landscapes often feel subtly undulating, even where the main valley form is broad. The floor may not be perfectly flat. It may rise and dip because of till, moraines, outwash, buried rock and later peat growth. Underfoot, the present softness may hide a complex arrangement of deposits. Your body might feel the changes as gentle slopes, wet patches and firmer ground, long before your mind names them. The Killarney upland valleys today carry the calm result of that complexity. A walker may notice only beauty, mist, lake, and mountain, and that is enough. But beneath the beauty lies the quiet architecture of retreat. The glacier's leaving was as important as its arrival. It determined where sediment stayed, where water gathered, and where later life could root. Departure became creation. There is a peaceful reflection in this. Leaving does not always empty a place. Sometimes it shapes what can remain. The glacier withdrew, and in its absence lakes formed, soils gathered, woodlands grew, and streams learned their new courses. The valley became fuller after the ice was gone, and as that thought settles, we follow one of those new courses through a wet hollow where peat begins to rise. A wet hollow in the Killarney landscape can feel almost weightless under the eyes, though underfoot it may be soft and full of water. Rushes stand in dim clusters. Moss holds droplets like tiny pieces of cloud. The smell is earthy, cool, and faintly sweet, with the deep scent of peat rising when the ground is disturbed. Such hollows often owe their existence to glacial shaping of drainage, sediment, and basin form. Their quiet is ancient. Peat growth begins when plant material accumulates faster than it decays, usually in saturated conditions where oxygen is limited. In a hollow left poorly drained by glacial deposits or overdeepened ground, water can linger long enough for this process to begin. Mosses, sedges, and other wetland plants live, die, and become part of the slowly thickening peat. The surface rises by small amounts over long spans, building softness over cold geology. You can imagine the first wet plants colonizing a shallow post-glacial pool or damp basin. Their roots bind sediment. Their stems catch more material. Each season adds a little organic matter. The water keeps decay slow. Eventually, open water may become marsh, then peatland, depending on local conditions. The glacial hollow does not stay raw. It becomes a dark, living sponge that holds rain and releases it slowly. Peatlands influence the valley's hydrology. They store water after rain, slow runoff, and feed streams gradually. They also create acidic, low-nutrient conditions that support specialized plant communities. In the Killarney upland valleys, wet ground, boggy pockets, and moss-rich habitats contribute to the deep, quiet feel of the landscape. They make the valley absorb sound, scent, and movement. There is a sleep-like quality to peat. It is plant life resting without fully disappearing. It is accumulation without haste. It is softness made from seasons. When you imagine your thoughts settling into a peat-dark hollow, they do not vanish sharply. They become quiet, layered and held in cool moisture. And as the peat holds rain, the surrounding slopes continue to send small streams down through woodland and stone. The wooded slopes near Killarney soften the glacial forms without hiding them completely. Tree roots grip thin soils over rock. Moss covers boulders that may have been shaped or carried by ice. Ferns lean from damp banks where water seeps through sediment. The air smells of bark, wet leaves, and mineral earth. You can walk there in thought beneath a canopy of shadow, while the old valley form remains beneath every root. Woodland development after glaciation depends on climate, soil, disturbance, and time. In this wet Atlantic setting, sheltered places can support lush growth, especially where moisture remains steady. The glacial valleys provide shelter and drainage contrasts that help create varied woodland conditions. A north-facing slope may hold cool dampness. A valley bottom may be wetter. A rocky rise may support thinner, more open growth. Each position gives life a different invitation. The trees themselves become part of ongoing geomorphic change. Roots widen cracks. Fallen leaves make humus. Decaying wood holds moisture. During storms, trees influence runoff and sediment movement. Over long time, woodland can reduce erosion by stabilizing soil, while also contributing organic matter to streams and lakes. The glacial landscape continues to evolve through living processes, but gently, and mostly below the threshold of notice. You can imagine rain moving through the canopy. It touches leaves first, then drips from branch to branch before reaching the mossy ground. Some water runs over exposed rock, some sinks into soil, some joins a small channel headed toward the lake. Every drop is slowed by the woodland, and that slowing gives the valley its restful sound after rain. The trees turn weather into a lullaby, yet the ice remains present in the way the woodland sits. It fills a trough, it follows a slope, it gathers near water held in a carved basin. It grows on deposits left behind by retreat. The forest is a living layer over a glacial form, not a separate scene placed upon it. Once you feel that, the whole valley becomes more unified, and as the woodland thins near the shore, the lake margin receives what the slopes have carried. At the meeting of land and lake, the Killarney Valley becomes especially tender. Stones lie half in water, half in air. Reeds stand where sediment has gathered. Roots reach into damp ground. The surface of the lake moves in small, dark motions against the shore. You can smell wet leaves, cool mineral water, and the faint earthiness of organic mud. This edge is where the glacial basin meets the living present. Lake margins are shaped by waves, sediment supply, water level, plant growth, and the inherited form of the basin. A steep rocky shore may drop quickly into deep water, while a gentler margin may allow reeds and wetland plants to spread. These differences often reflect the underlying glacial topography and post-glacial sedimentation. The ice carved the container, and later processes adjusted the edges. Incoming streams bring material from the uplands. Coarser grains settle near mouths, while finer particles drift farther into still water. Organic matter from leaves, roots, and aquatic plants accumulates in quieter coves. Over time, shoreline habitats develop in response to this balance of water movement and sediment. The edge of the lake is never fixed forever, though its changes are often slow enough to feel like stillness. You can imagine kneeling at such a shore and watching the water over stones. Some stones may be local fragments, loosened from nearby slopes. Others may have been transported by ice before being reworked by water. Fine silt lies between them. A small plant roots in the sheltered margin. Everything touches everything else, and the lake quietly accepts each arrival. This edge is a beautiful place to let wakefulness soften. It is neither land nor water entirely. It is transition, and transitions are natural places to become drowsy. The waves do not insist. The reeds do not hurry. The glacial basin holds the lake, and the lake holds the shore, and the shore holds the small sounds of night. And as the shore darkens, we look outward, across the water to the slopes carved into reflection. Across the lake, the mountains and valley sides appear as dark forms mirrored on the surface. The reflection is softer than the slopes themselves, broken only by faint ripples. You can imagine the old ice moving where the reflection now lies, filling the basin and pressing against stone. The present water repeats the shape without weight, turning carved geology into a moving image. The valley becomes double in the dark. Reflection is not a geological process, yet it changes how we feel the glacial form. The lake shows the trough twice, once in rock and once in water. It makes the valley seem deeper, quieter, and more spacious. When clouds pass, their shadows drift over the reflected slopes. When night settles, both real and mirrored mountains fade together. The eye is drawn downward into stillness. This visual calm depends on the existence of the lake, and the lake depends on glacial shaping. So even the reflection is indirectly an Ice Age gift. Without the overdeepened basin, without thresholds and drainage patterns, the water might not rest here in the same way. Without the water, the mountains would rise only once. With it, they descend into darkness, and the mind descends with them. You can let that reflected descent carry you. The real slopes rise above the shore. Their mirrored forms sink below. Between them lies the surface, thin and quiet, holding sky and stone together. It is a perfect image for sleep, because it asks you to release the need to know which direction is more important. Up and down become gentle. In the Killarney Upland valleys, such reflections make geological time feel intimate. Ice carved the basin, water filled it, evening darkened it. Your imagination rests beside it. The result is not a lesson delivered sharply, but a landscape breathing in low tones, inviting thought to become slower than thought. And as the reflected slopes fade, the valley's ancient cold becomes only a shape felt in the night. The ice is gone from these valleys now, but its absence has a presence of its own. You feel it in the open trough where darkness gathers. You feel it in the lake that rests too deeply for a small stream alone to explain. You feel it in rounded stone, wet hollows, quiet passes, and scattered boulders. The Killarney upland valleys are filled with forms that say, softly, something large passed here slowly. Absence is often how geology speaks. A glacier melts, but the valley remains wider. A block of ice disappears, but a hollow may stay. A meltwater stream abandons its channel, but the channel continues as a curved mark along a slope. The process ends, and the form persists. Tonight, we are listening to those forms after the sound of their making has faded. This is why the landscape feels peaceful rather than empty. It has been shaped and released. The ice completed its work and withdrew into climate history. Water, soil, plants, and weather took over. The valley did not remain a raw trace of cold. It became a calm, living place where the old forms support new softness. Nothing here asks us to fear the past. The past is resting under moss. You can imagine the glacier's former route as a pale memory, laid over the present valley. It begins high among clouded hollows, flows through passes, widens troughs, deepens basins, and leaves stones behind. Then the pale memory dissolves, and the lake, woodland, peat, and streams return to the foreground. The two landscapes occupy the same space, one visible, one remembered. As your breathing slows, the remembered ice can become less like an image, and more like a gentle weight in the mind. Not heavy in a burdensome way, but steady. It reminds you that deep change can happen slowly, and that a place can be reshaped without losing its ability to become quiet. And as that remembered weight settles, we drift through the valley as it is now, after rain. After rain, the Killarney upland valleys seem polished from within. Rocks darken, leaves shine, moss swells brighter in the dim light, streams carry a little more water, and the lakes receive the soft tapping of drops from overhanging branches. You can smell the full dampness of the place, mineral, green, and earthy at once. The Ice Age is far behind, yet every wet surface rests in its inheritance. Rain runs differently across a glacial landscape than it would across an unshaped one. Broad troughs collect flow, Overdeepened basins hold water. Moraines and deposits redirect drainage. Wet hollows store rainfall. Slopes shed water into streams whose courses reflect older ice pathways. The present rain is a daily event, but its root is ancient. It moves through decisions made by stone, ice, and time. You can follow rain down a rock face polished long ago. It slips over lichen, gathers along a crack, falls into moss, and joins a tiny channel. From there it moves through grass, over sediment, into a stream, and toward a lake. Nothing is wasted, nothing moves alone. Even the smallest trickle belongs to the valley's larger body. The sound after rain is layered, but soft. Water drips from leaves. Streams murmur more fully. The lake edge laps against stones. Wind moves through wet branches with a darker tone. These sounds do not compete. They settle into one another, the way sediments settle into a basin. Listening to them, you can feel how glacial landforms become acoustic spaces, holding the weather gently. There is comfort in a landscape that receives rain well. It does not need to stay dry or bright to be beautiful. Its wetness is part of its memory. The valley was shaped by frozen water and is now maintained by falling water. The same element, under different temperatures and timescales, keeps returning in new forms. And as the rainwater travels, the oldest pathways in the valley continue to guide it downward. Some pathways in the Killarney Upland valleys began as river courses, were widened by ice, and are now followed again by streams, paths of drainage, and bands of wet ground. You can imagine these routes as low, quiet lines running through the landscape. They are not always obvious from one place, but water knows them. Mist knows them. Cold air at night settles into them with a slow certainty. A valley's shape influences the movement of air as well as water. Cool air can drain downslope and collect in lower hollows after sunset. Lakes and wet ground affect humidity and temperature. Sheltered troughs may hold mist longer than exposed ridges. These microclimates shape the feel of the landscape and the life within it. Ice carved the broad container, and the night air uses it without effort. You may notice how a valley floor can feel cooler than the slope above, especially when the evening is calm. The air near the lake is damp against the skin. Grass holds moisture. Stones keep the days chill. The darkness seems denser below, as if it too has flowed downhill. These sensations are not separate from geology. They are geology translated into atmosphere. In such a place, the Killarney glacial story becomes something you feel rather than only understand. The wide floor lets you breathe. The enclosing slopes quiet the wind. The lake cools the air. The wet ground softens your imagined steps. Every sensory detail is tied to form, and every form is tied to the old ice. This is the kind of knowledge that can remain gentle. It does not require alertness. You can let the facts loosen into feeling. Ice widened the valley, and now the night lies wide. Ice deepened the basin, and now water lies dark. Ice left hollows, and now mist rests there. And as the mist rests in those hollows, we move toward the small lakes and tarns held higher in the uplands. Higher up, smaller waters may rest in rock basins, hollows, and pockets among the hills. They feel more exposed than the large lakes below, closer to cloud and wind. You can imagine one at night as a dark oval in stone and grass, with wet slopes falling toward it and the air cool against your face. Its silence is more open, less wooded, but still shaped by glacial patience. Small upland lakes or tarns often occupy hollows associated with glacial erosion, cirque basins, or irregular scouring of bedrock. Some may also be influenced by deposits that hold water back. Their scale is modest, but their origin carries the same deep processes. Snow gathered, ice formed, rock was abraded and plucked. A depression remained. Water filled it after the cold passed. You can picture the water of such a tarn under low cloud. There may be no trees at its edge, only grasses, stones, and wet ground. A small stream enters from the slope and another leaves through a shallow outlet. The shore smells of peat, mineral water, and cold vegetation. The surface moves in tiny ripples from wind, then calms when the air eases. It feels remote, but not lonely. These high waters help connect the uplands to the lower valleys. They store rainfall, feed streams, and add to the chain of flow descending toward larger lakes. They also hold sediment and organic matter in miniature, creating small archives of local change. A tarn may seem simple, but it participates in the whole glacially shaped drainage system, one quiet basin among many. For sleep, these small lakes offer a lighter kind of stillness. The large lower lakes feel deep and enveloping. The upland tarn feels cool, spare, and close to the sky. Both come from ice. Both hold water in carved or blocked places. Both teach the same lesson in different tones, that a hollow can become a resting place. And as the upland tarn sends its outflow downward, we return through wet grass toward the valley stream. The outflow begins as a narrow thread slipping from the tarn's lip, crossing saturated ground and finding a path between stones. You can hear it close to the earth, a small running sound under wind. It gathers other trickles from the slope, each one carrying cold rain and fine mineral particles. Slowly the thread becomes more confident, drawing a line down toward the Killarney upland valleys below. Such headwater streams are sensitive to slope, soil, and bedrock. Where the ground is thin and rocky, water may run quickly over the surface. Where peat has developed, water may be stored and released more gradually. Where glacial deposits create uneven drainage, streams may curve, vanish into wet ground, or reappear farther down. The path of water is both simple and intricate, guided by gravity through a glacially shaped maze. You can imagine following it without trying to keep up. The stream slips over a rounded stone. It gathers in a dark pool. It passes under grass, leaning from both sides. It touches boulders that may have been loosened by frost, moved by ice, and settled by time. Every turn is small, but the descent is continuous. The valley below receives these small beginnings with quiet patience. As the stream grows, it begins to cut and sort the deposits it crosses. It may expose layers of gravel or till along its banks. It may undercut soft sediment during high flow and leave tiny bars when water falls. In this way, modern fluvial processes continue to modify glacial deposits. The ice created the materials and forms, while the stream refines them in present time. The sound of this stream is a good sound to carry toward sleep. It is neither empty nor demanding. It has movement, but the movement is predictable. It falls, gathers, slides, and rests. Your thoughts can follow it loosely, then lose it, then find it again lower down, exactly as a half-asleep mind may drift and return. And as the stream reaches the broader floor, it enters a valley too large for its own small voice. Here the scale changes again. The stream that felt lively on the slope becomes modest on the broad floor of the Killarney Valley. It winds through a space shaped by ice far larger than its present flow. You can see it in imagination, a narrow silver ribbon across dark grass, with the valley sides rising wide and quiet beyond. Its smallness is not weakness. It is a sign of history. A misfit stream, living in an oversized valley, tells us that a former agent of erosion was larger or different from the current river. In glacial valleys, that agent was ice. The glacier filled the trough, widened it, and deepened it, leaving behind a valley that later streams occupy only partly. The present water maintains and adjusts the floor, but it did not create the whole broad form by itself. This contrast creates a peaceful spaciousness. The stream does not fill the valley with sound. It leaves room for wind, mist, insects, leaves, and silence. The broad floor allows wetland patches, lake margins, and meadows or wooded ground to exist side by side. The glacier made an overlarge vessel, and the present ecosystem occupies it with gentle variety. You can imagine standing beside the stream at night and looking across the valley. The far slope is a dark, soft wall. The lake may lie ahead, reflecting a faint sky. Underfoot, the ground is damp and cool. The stream moves steadily, but everything around it seems still. That proportion, small flow within large form, is deeply soothing to the body. It says that not every space has to be filled. Some places are large enough to hold quiet. The Killarney upland valleys, shaped by ice and softened by water, have this gift. They make room around the small things, and in that room, the mind can loosen. And as the small stream continues through the oversized trough, the valley floor reveals its layered deposits. Under the grass and wet soil, the valley floor may contain till, outwash sands and gravels, lake sediments, peat, and reworked alluvium from modern streams. You can imagine these layers not as a dry diagram, but as textures stacked under your resting feet. Dense mixed sediment, cleaner gravel, fine silt, dark organic matter. Each layer was placed by a different kind of water or ice, and each holds a different quiet. Till tells of direct glacial release. It is mixed because ice carries material without sorting it by size. Outwash tells of flowing meltwater, which sorts grains according to current strength. Lake sediments tell of still water, where fine particles fall slowly from suspension. Peat tells of wet ground and slow decay. Stream alluvium tells of the present drainage continuing to move and settle material after the ice is gone. These materials influence the surface world in ways you can feel. Gravel may drain and feel firmer. Fine sediment may hold water. Peat may yield softly and smell dark. Till may create poorly drained patches where rain lingers. The living valley rests on these differences, and the patterns of plants, wetness, and sound arise partly from them. The ground is a layered instrument played by weather. You can imagine a shallow bank cut by a stream, exposing a glimpse of this hidden arrangement. Perhaps there is a lower layer of compact stony till, overlain by finer sediment, then dark soil with roots. Water seeps from one level and not another. Moss hangs at the edge. The bank is small, but it reveals how the valley floor was assembled, not all at once, but through many slow arrivals. There is no need to hold every term. Let the textures remain. Mixed earth from ice, sorted gravel from meltwater, fine mud from lake stillness, dark peat from wet plants, present soil from living roots. The valley is not a single surface, it is a calm stack of former movements brought to rest. And as these buried textures continue beneath us, the mountains around the valley hold the memory of ice in their shapes. The slopes above Killarney rise with a mixture of rounded forms and rougher edges, and that mixture tells of both glacial smoothing and weathering by frost, rain, and gravity. You can imagine a mountainside in low light, with darker rock showing through green patches, and cloud brushing the upper ridges. The air is cooler there, and the smell of wet stone comes more strongly. The mountain feels old in a way that quiets speech. Glacial ice can smooth lower slopes where it moves thickly against them, while higher or more exposed areas may be shaped by freeze-thaw weathering, snow accumulation, and slope processes. This combination gives upland landscapes their varied appearance. A valley wall may be broad and polished in its larger form, while nearer surfaces show broken blocks, scree, and rough outcrops. Time adds moss and grass, softening the contrast. You can see how the mountain's shape guides water. Rain falling high on the slope enters cracks, runs over bedrock, soaks into thin soil, or travels into peat patches. Some become seepage, emerging lower down as springs. Some join streams that fall toward the valley floor. The mountain sends water into the glacial trough, and the trough carries it onward. The system is continuous, from cloud to lake. The upland ridges also preserve the feeling of ice's thickness. At certain times, ice may have buried much of the landscape. At others, ridges may have stood above the ice or near its margin. These differences influence where glacial smoothing is strongest and where frost-shattered roughness remains. The mountain is therefore a record of contact and exposure, of places covered and places weathered in open cold. For the listener, these distinctions can soften into a simple image: high dark slopes, wet rock, cloud moving slowly, a broad valley below holding water. The ice age is present in the whole arrangement, but the feeling is not analytical. It is restful, because every form is settled into night. And as cloud lowers onto the mountain, the high hollows begin to disappear into mist. Mist in the Killarney uplands often makes distance feel gentle. It covers the upper slopes first, then drifts into corries, hollows, and passes, softening the edges of rock and heather. You can imagine it moving where snow once collected, a pale present echo of colder accumulation. It does not carve, it does not press, it only settles, cool and damp, turning the high ground into silence. High hollows are often significant in glacial landscapes because they can shelter snow and initiate local ice formation. Their shapes may be enhanced by processes linked to snow patches, frost, and small glaciers. After the ice retreats, these hollows may hold tarns, peat, or simply wetter ground. Mist gathers in them easily, making their forms more visible through softness rather than sharpness. You can picture a hollow partly filled with cloud. The ground under the mist is uneven, wet and dark. A few stones show at the edge, rounded by weather or ice. Water seeps from the basin and begins its descent. The air smells close, mineral, and faintly vegetal. Sound is reduced to the smallest possible scale, perhaps a drip, a breath of wind, or the faintest movement of water. In this mist, the difference between past snow and present cloud feels delicate. Both whiten the hollow, both quiet the senses. But snow became ice because it remained, compacted, and gathered weight. Mist passes lightly, leaving droplets on grass and rock. The valley's history helps us feel that difference without needing drama. One whiteness shaped the land, the other simply rests on it. This present mist can be a comfort because it shows the landscape still receiving moisture from the sky, still holding it in the same shapes, still sending it downward. The Ice Age is over. But the uplands remain a place where water changes form and begins journeys. Cloud, rain, stream, lake, and peat all belong to the same slow cycle. And as the mist spills lower, we follow it into the pass, where sound grows close again. In the pass, the land narrows enough that every small sound feels near. Water trickles beside stone. Wind brushes the grass in a long, low movement. The damp rock holds the days cold, and the air smells of rain, lichen, and open ground. You can imagine walking through this place slowly, while mist clings to the sides and the Killarney upland valleys wait beyond the opening. The passage feels softened by night. Glacial passes often reflect the way ice exploited lower routes between high areas. When ice was thick, it could move through and across divides, abrading and widening pathways. Meltwater later followed these corridors, and modern streams or small lakes may occupy parts of them. The pass becomes a natural connector, not only for movement now, but for processes over time. Ice, water, air, and sound all use the same opening. The narrowness changes the way we experience the glacial story. In a broad valley, ice feels like a great open weight. In a pass, it feels focused. The walls are nearer. The path is more defined. Erosion may have been concentrated along the floor, and small basins may have formed where rock was scoured. After deglaciation, water remained in some hollows, adding quiet eyes of darkness along the route. You can imagine those small waters under mist. They have no need to be large. A tarn or pool in a pass can hold the whole sky when the air is still. Stones at the edge glisten. Grass bends into the water. A faint ripple passes and fades. The ice that shaped the hollow is gone, but the hollow continues to receive weather, reflection, and night. A pass teaches us that descent can pass through narrowness without urgency. The land gathers you, carries you through, and opens again. Your breathing can follow that pattern. Inhale in the close stone corridor. Exhale as the valley widens. The ice once moved this way, and now attention moves here more lightly. And as the pass opens, the wider Killarney Basin receives us once more. The broader basin feels darker now, because the sky has lost nearly all color. The lake is present as a low sheen, and the valley floor lies damp and shadowed around it. You can sense the scale even without seeing every edge. The slopes rise in the distance. The water rests in its overdeepened hollow. The air is cool and moist against the skin. Everything feels settled. This basin is a meeting place of processes. Ice carved and deepened it. Meltwater filled and drained across it. Sediment accumulated within it. Rain continues to feed it. Plants stabilize and soften it. Streams connect it to higher and lower ground. The Killarney upland valleys are therefore not a static relic, but a living arrangement inherited from glaciation and renewed each day by weather. You can imagine the basin after the glacier first left, bare and bright with wet sediment. Then imagine it centuries later, with plants spreading. Then later still, with woodland deepening, peat forming, and lake margins becoming rich with life. Now return to tonight, where all those stages are folded into the darkness around you. The present moment is full because it contains so many earlier moments resting beneath it. The lake surface carries the last dim light, like a thin veil. Beneath it, sediments continue their slow descent. Around it, roots hold soil. Above it, slopes send water down. Nothing is finished, and nothing is hurried. The basin is active in the most restful way, changing by increments too small to trouble the night. For a tired mind, this is a generous landscape. It offers depth without alarm, complexity without sharpness, and history without noise. You can let the facts become textures, and let the textures become sleep. Stone, ice, water, moss, peat, cloud, and shadow all soften into one continuous valley. And as the basin holds us, the memory of the last great cold period drifts quietly through the darkness. During the last major glaciation, Ireland was covered and influenced by extensive ice, with local patterns shaped by uplands, ice flow, and climate. In Killarney, the forms we've been following were strongly refreshed or created by that late cold world. You can imagine the valley under a pale cover again, not to leave the present, but to understand why the present feels so broad, wet, and deep. The last ice did not act alone in an empty landscape. It overrode older forms, perhaps modifying traces from earlier cold stages. It followed existing valleys and structural weaknesses. It carried material from slopes and bedrock. It reshaped drainage and left deposits that later controlled water and soil. The Killarney upland valleys, as they appear now, are the result of inheritance and renewal, older patterns reworked by younger ice. This layered history means that some features may have more than one origin, or more than one phase of development. A hollow may have been started by pre-glacial erosion, enlarged by ice, filled by water, and edged by peat. A pass may have begun as a structural low, been widened by glacier flow, and later occupied by streams and small lakes. Landscapes rarely keep their stories in single lines. You can let that complexity remain gentle. We do not need to divide every feature into exact stages tonight. It is enough to know that the land has been shaped repeatedly, and that each shaping left conditions for the next. The present valley is not a final answer. It is a resting arrangement, one that holds Ice Age memory inside living weather. There is a kind of humility in this, and humility can be soothing. The valley is older and slower than our need to understand it completely. It allows us to know some things, to wonder about others, and to rest inside both knowledge and mystery. The darkness over the lake makes that balance feel natural, and as mystery remains around the edges, the tangible forms underfoot keep guiding us gently onward. A rounded rock beside the path is enough. You do not need a full map to begin reading the landscape. Its damp surface, softened outline, and position near the valley floor may suggest the passage of ice, the work of water, or both. You can touch it in imagination and feel chill, lichen, and mineral grain. The Killarney upland valleys become understandable through these small physical encounters. Geology is often most comforting when it returns to touch. A glacial trough may be immense, but a stone fits under your hand. A lake basin may be deep, but a shore pebble glistens at your feet. A moraine may shape drainage over a valley scale, but its presence can be felt as a low rise in the ground. The large and the small are connected, and the body understands connections before the mind names them. This is why an atmospheric walk through Killarney can feel both intimate and vast. You move among close details, wet moss, dark stones, dripping leaves, and small streams, while all around you are the large forms of Ice Age carving. The valley does not need to choose between nearness and depth. It offers both at once, and both are quiet. As your attention softens, you may notice that the landscape's history is not behind it. It is inside it. The old ice is inside the valley shape. The meltwater is inside the sediments. The post-glacial forest is inside the soil. The rain is inside the stream. The stream is inside the lake. Everything is held within everything else. That kind of holding can feel like rest. A thought does not need to stand alone. A sound does not need to remain separate. The mind can let one image dissolve into another, just as water from the slope dissolves into the basin below. And as the images dissolve, we follow the valley into the deeper hush before dawn, still far from any ending. In the hush before dawn, the Killarney upland valleys seem to rest below thought, with their lakes dark, their slopes softened, and their old glacial forms hidden under grass, water, moss and sleep. You can feel the cool air lying low in the troughs, gathered there by the same broad shapes the ice left behind. A stream moves somewhere nearby, but only faintly, as if even water has lowered its voice. The stones keep their cold quietly. There is no need now to follow the glacier any farther. Its path has become the valley floor beneath you, the lake basin beside you, the rounded rock under rain, and the wet hollow where peat holds the dark. The ice has gone into shape, and the shape has gone into stillness. You can let the last images loosen, the high snowfields fading first, then the passes, then the wooded slopes, until only the nearest water remains. The lake receives the night without effort. Fine sediment settles through it grain by grain, so slowly that settling and stillness become almost the same thing. Above the surface, the hills are only shadow, and above the hills the sky has grown pale at its lowest edge. The valley does not ask you to notice the change. It only holds it with the same patience that held ice, rain, roots, and time. So you come to rest here at the bottom of the quiet valley, where ancient cold has become soft ground, and the dark water lies still in its carved hollow.